Chapter 2045. Everyone stared fixedly at the outer world that was on the verge of being destroyed. Within the outer world, Yi Xian's sword had arrived before the Defying Walker. Bang! The space in front of the Defying Walker caved in. The Defying Walker's pupils constricted slightly. His defying energy was unable to reverse Yi Xian's attack. He didn't think too much about it and he suddenly punched forward with his left hand. A powerful force swept out from his fist. It was a very direct punch. It wasn't flashy at all. Bang! An expanse of sword light and fist light erupted before everyone's eyes. In the distance, Yi Xian, who was lying on the ground, suddenly closed his eyes slowly. A moment later he pushed up lightly with his thumb. Boom! Another sword flew out from within his scabbard. This was his final attack. The true final attack. Actually, this attack was very risky because he was at the end of his rope. However, he still attacked. He had to do his best in everything. Especially in a fight. If he didn't fight with his life on the line, he might lose his life. As soon as he executed that attack, Yi Xian's aura started to weaken rapidly, and he didn't pay any more attention to the Defying Walker. He'd done his best. If he still couldn't defeat the Defying Walker, then he had no other choice. In the distance, Yi Xian's fifth attack stabbed directly onto the Defying Walker's fist, and the Defying Walker's formidable strength wasn't able to resist Yi Xian's attack. The sword pierced straight through the Defying Walker's fist and into his chest. Bang! In an instant, the Defying Walker's entire body was blasted flying. However, another attack slashed over. The Defying Walker raised his head and looked at the sixth attack and his eyes narrowed slightly. In the next moment he opened his left hand and clenched it. Bang! His body shattered by itself. He destroyed his own body. The moment his physical body was destroyed, the fifth sword attack exploded along with his physical body. However, his soul also became illusory in an instant. It should be noted that Yi Xian's fifth sword attack contained an extremely terrifying all-realms aura. Meanwhile, the Defying Walker closed his eyes slowly, and then he suddenly pressed his palms together. Bang! His soul directly blocked Yi Xian's sixth attack. Rumble! The Defying Walker retreated several tens of thousands of feet again. When he finally stopped, his soul had already fallen into a pitch-black space-time abyss. However, he forcefully blocked Yi Xian's sixth sword. The sword stopped when it was half an inch away from his forehead. However, the power in the sword was still there. The Defying Walker held the sword tightly. He could not loosen his grip. Once he loosened his grip, the sword would pierce through his forehead. In his current state, if he was pierced by Yi Xian's sixth sword attack, his soul would definitely collapse. Not only his soul but even his consciousness might be wiped out directly. And he didn't have the power to destroy this sword. The damage that Yi Xian's fifth sword had dealt to him was too great. At this moment the outer world had vanished completely. However, their battle was not over yet. Neither the Devil Vein nor the Saint Vein interfered, nor did they dare to. Anyone who interfered would have to fight to the death. Thus Yi Xian and the Defying One were in a stalemate. Who would recover first? At this moment Yi Xian, who was on the ground in the distance, suddenly opened his eyes slowly. Shuang and the others outside were extremely excited at the sight of this. As for Gu Qin and the others, their expressions had turned completely unsightly. Yi Xian stood up slowly. Although his countenance was still extremely pale, it was much better than before. The reason he was able to recover so quickly was naturally because of the undying bloodline. So long as the Defying Walker didn't kill him instantly, then he would be able to recover continuously. The Defying Walker's eyes instantly narrowed when he saw Yi Xian stand up, and he gazed at Yi Xian with a calm expression. Yi Xian took a deep breath. At this moment his entire body still felt weak as if it had been sucked dry. Those 6 sword strikes from before had consumed all his strength. After a short moment, Yi Xian suddenly walked slowly towards the Defying Walker. The Defying Walker's hands were still clasped together, and his hands were trembling. Yi Xian gazed at the Defying Walker while another sword appeared in the sheath in his left hand. Gu Qin's expression instantly changed when he witnessed this scene, and he was about to attack. But in next to no time he was slightly stunned. In the next moment his expression calmed down and he didn't attack again. Yi Xian suddenly stopped moving and he gazed at the Defying Walker. After a short moment he grinned. Let's call it a draw this time. What do you think? A draw. Su Chong and the others frowned when they heard this. Su Chong was about to speak when he was stopped by the Divine Elder. The divine elder gazed at Yi Xian and said, "Don't interfere in the matter between them." Su Chong hesitated for a moment, but he didn't choose to interfere in the end. The defying walker fell silent for a moment before he nodded. "All right." As he spoke, he loosened his grip and the sixth sword strike actually transformed into nothingness. Su Chong's pupils constricted when he witnessed this scene. It turned out that the defying walker still had strength and he had been holding back all this time. He was waiting for Yi Xian to attack and then he would kill Yi Xian with a single strike. Yi Xian had obviously noticed this, so he didn't choose to attack directly. Instead, he chose not to attack. If Yi Xian didn't attack, then the defying walker wouldn't dare to attack. Because the defying walker was afraid that Yi Xian would hold back. Both sides were wary of each other. In the distance, the defying walker looked at Yi Xian and said, "You've chosen to comply with the Tendo?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Yes." The defying walker frowned slightly and said, "We cultivators are destined to defy the heavens from the moment we start cultivating. You've chosen to comply with the Tendo. In other words, it's a form of submission." Outside, the expressions of Su Wang and the others turned solemn. Was the defying walker going to choose a battle of words? Could Yi Xian defeat him? After all, most of the time, a battle of words was to break the opponent's mental state. In the distance, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. There's nothing wrong with cultivating. However, what's wrong with the Tendo? The Tendo is also a member of this vast universe. If you want to cultivate, then cultivate. Why do you have to defy others? What has the heavens done wrong? The defying walker looked at Yi Xian and said, "Cultivating is the same as fighting against the heavens, isn't it?" However, Yi Xian shook his head and said, "In some small worlds, humans need to survive and develop. However, their development will destroy the environment and the ecology. In other words, they are destroying the place that nurtured them. I can't say that humans are at fault. Because humans need to develop and survive, they can only do that. However, what's wrong with the planet they live on? You were born on this planet and this planet nurtured you. One day you became strong. Then you felt that this world was hindering you. Thus you want to defy the heavens." Saying that, he smiled slightly and said, "This is like a person who has raised his son for decades. But in the end, his son thinks that his old age is a burden." The defying walker stared at Yi Xian and said, "You're changing the concept." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Then let me ask you. Were you born in this universe? If you were, then did this world nurture you? This world nurtured you, but you want to defy the heavens. Let me ask you, what has the Tendo done wrong?" At this moment, the surroundings suddenly trembled and countless spiritual energy surged towards Yi Xian. The Tendo was responding to Yi Xian. Seeing this scene on the other side, Gu Qin's face suddenly turned ugly. Yi Xian said again, "Humans need to cultivate and survive. There's nothing wrong with that. However, I feel that this is everyone's ambition and desire. It has nothing to do with the Tendo. Isn't it a bit too much to turn your ambition and desire into the Tendo's fault?" The defying walker stared at Yi Xian and said, "But you cultivate and you are defying the heavens." Yi Xian blinked and said, "If the Tendo also cultivates, then who is it defying?" The defying walker's expression froze. Yi Xian continued, "I feel that humans are selfish and I am also selfish. However, we shouldn't be a whore and establish a chastity memorial. If the Tendo really harmed you and you want to defy the heavens, I can understand. The Tendo did not harm you and you want to defy the heavens. I think that's nonsense. In any case, I'm willing to be friends with all the good Tendo in the world." As soon as he finished speaking, a figure silently condensed into appearance in the sky. It was a woman. The woman wore a pure white dress, and there was a little bit of vermilion between her brows. She was very beautiful. Tendo. Xu Wang and the others frowned when they saw the woman. What's this Tendo doing here? There were naturally Tendo in the grand skyscraper region as well. However, the Tendo usually didn't have much of a presence. After all, with the strength that Xu Wang and the others possessed right now, ordinary Tendo were truly very weak in their eyes. The woman gazed at Yi Xian and grinned. "Thank you." Yi Xian smiled and said, "What are you thanking me for?" The woman chuckled. "Thank you for speaking on our behalf." Yi Xian grinned. "Thank all of you for helping me just now. You can come looking for me if you need anything in the future. I'll definitely help you if it's within my ability." The woman hesitated for a moment and said, "Really?" Yi Xian nodded. The woman bowed slightly. "Young man, I know that you're no ordinary person. I'll remember what you said today and I'll come looking for you if I need any trouble in the future." I hope you won't refuse it that time. As she spoke, she opened her palm and a white brand drifted down slowly. In the end, it entered the center of Yi Xian's forehead. Bang! Yi Xian's figure trembled slightly while a faint brand appeared on the center of his forehead. Yi Xian was quite puzzled. What's that? The woman said, that's a Tendo's brand. Since you possess it, then all the spirits in this universe will assist you. Moreover, the Tendo from other universes will trust you as well if they see this brand. If you need anything, then we'll do our best to assist you as well. Su Chong's eyes narrowed slightly when he heard this. She's trying to befriend that young man. The divine elder spoke softly. That fellow is going to be rich. Su Chong gazed at the divine elder. Why do you say that? The divine elder spoke in a low voice. Earlier he was only able to mobilize the force of an entire world. But now, if he obtains the acknowledgement of those Tendo, then he won't just be able to mobilize force. Instead, he'll be able to mobilize the energy of an entire world. As he spoke, he glanced at Yi Xian. This fellow has become a friend of the Tendo. Chapter 2046. A friend of the Tendo. At this moment, Yi Xian hadn't expected that he would actually obtain the acknowledgement of the Tendo of this world. He knew that living beings like the Tendo were extremely vigilant towards humans and other living beings, but the Wayfarer had actually chosen to give him a Tendo's mark. Of course, this was a good thing. An extraordinarily good thing. He didn't even need to utilize the Grand Tao scripture now. Moreover, he could even draw support from the energy of the universe. There was a huge difference between borrowing power and borrowing power. The Defying One took a deep and long glance at Yi Xian. Let's fight another day. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Yi Xian watched silently as the Defying One left. Meanwhile, Su Chong and the others appeared by Yi Xian's side. Su Chong sized up Yi Xian. Are you all right? Yi Xian shook his head. I'm going into closed-door cultivation for some time. Su Chong nodded. All right. As he spoke, he gazed at Mu Gu. Make arrangements for him. Yi Xian suddenly smiled. Leader, there's no need to make any arrangements. Just give me a quiet hull. Su Chong hesitated for a moment before he nodded. All right. Yi Xian vanished on the spot. Su Chong spoke softly. I never expected such an outcome. Everyone here nodded. They hadn't expected that it would actually end in a tie. Meanwhile, the God of Peace suddenly spoke softly. This is the best outcome. The divine elder nodded. It really is the best outcome. As he spoke, he gazed at the God of Peace. How did you notice this little fellow? Everyone here gazed at the God of Peace. Obviously, they were curious as well. The God of Peace fell silent for a moment before he said, I picked him up. Everyone was speechless. Within the Xiaota, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground with his eyes closed. Meanwhile, Xiaota spoke with excitement. Young master, congratulations. Yi Xian was quite puzzled. What are you congratulating me for? Xiaota said, I thought you were going to utilize the green profound sword and the energy of your bloodline, but you didn't. Yi Xian was silent. In fact, he really did not want to use the azure profound sword and the power of his bloodline this time. He had no way of dealing with the experts of the older generation, but the Defying Ones were not experts of the older generation. He Yi Xian had his own pride. Meanwhile, Xiaota spoke in a low voice. Young master, I've realized that you're actually not so bad. Yi Xian's face darkened. Damn it, was I that bad in your heart before? Xiaota hesitated for a moment before he said, I refuse to answer that question. Yi Xian was speechless. Yi Xian didn't want to waste any more time with this guy. He slowly closed his eyes. It had to be said that the battle with the Defying Ones was a little dangerous. Especially the power of the Defying Ones. If he hadn't cultivated the sword physique, then he would have died on the first attack. Most importantly, he was able to sense that the Defying Ones hadn't used all his strength. Especially the fact that the Defying Ones had been able to shatter his sixth attack at the end. This meant that the Defying Ones still had some tricks up their sleeves. At the thought of this, Yi Xian opened his palm, and the green profound sword appeared in his hand. The green profound sword trembled slightly as if it was responding to him. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. I'll definitely bring you along to battle next time. The green profound sword trembled for a moment, and then it let out a sword howl. After that, Yi Xian started to heal his injuries. Even though he had the undying bloodline, the 6 attacks he'd executed earlier were still quite an injury to him. A little bit of time wasn't enough for him to fully recover. For hours later, Xian's injuries were more or less healed. After that, he immediately went to look for the Divine Elder and the other two. Xian gazed at the Divine Elder before him. "Senior, I want to continue the battle." The Divine Elder glanced at Xian. "Sure. 1 against 3. Without any suspense, without using the green profound sword and the power of bloodline, he was directly beaten up by the Divine Elder and the other two. At this moment, Xian realized that he had underestimated the Divine Elder and the other two. Their battle awareness and teamwork were truly terrifying, especially their teamwork. If he had been the slightest bit careless, he would have been beaten up badly, and he wouldn't even have had the chance to resist. Of course, this made Xian even more excited. Being beaten up meant that he wasn't strong enough and there was still room for improvement. During the battle with the three, he insisted on not using the green profound sword and the power of bloodline. The green profound sword was given to him by Qing, and the power of bloodline was given to him by his father. Neither of these were cultivated by himself. Strictly speaking, they were considered external objects. He wanted to see if he could really fight without external objects. Devil Veins. Gu Qin stood on the peak of a mountain, and behind him stood a middle-aged man. This man was Muyo, who had returned from his investigation. Gu Qin said softly, "Did the ancient emperor die at the hands of that Xian?" Muyo shook his head. "No. He died at the hands of the person behind him." Gu Qin narrowed his eyes. "The person behind him?" Muyo nodded. "A green-robed man. However, this person is very mysterious. We couldn't find out his background." Gu Qin was silent. Muyo suddenly said, "As far as I know, that Xian came to our place and entered the sacred bloodline, right?" Gu Qin nodded. "Just before that, he fought with the Defying Ones." Hearing this, Muyo frowned. "How is that possible? As far as I know, he isn't very strong. He couldn't even defeat the ancient emperor. In the end, he had to call for help to kill the ancient emperor. How could he have fought with the Defying Ones?" Gu Qin said plainly, "I don't believe it either, but that's the truth." Muyo said solemnly, "In that case, he must have improved during this period. But how long has it been? How could he have improved so much?" Gu Qin's eyes closed slowly. "Nothing is impossible. Don't use common sense to judge some monstrous geniuses." Muyo fell silent. Gu Qin continued. "Are you really unable to find out anything about that green-robed man?" Muyo shook his head. "I can't." Gu Qin fell silent. Meanwhile, Muyo said, "Do you need to take revenge?" Gu Qin gazed at Muyo. "Use your brain and think about it. What sort of power could nurture such a monstrous genius?" Muyo hesitated for a moment and said, "Didn't we nurture a Defying One as well?" Gu Qin shook his head slightly while a wisp of self-ridicule arose on the corners of his mouth. "Were Defying Ones nurtured by the Devil Vein?" "Not at all. Actually, besides him, no one else in the Devil Vein knew that the Defying Ones actually had another identity, and they were only temporarily staying in the Devil Vein. The Devil Vein did not have the ability to nurture a monstrous genius like the Defying Ones. One had to know that the Defying Ones were equivalent to going against the heavens, and they would always be going against the heavens. Such people needed a powerful Tao protector. Otherwise, they would be killed by some mysterious existence before they could grow. Moreover, Xian was not inferior to the Defying Ones. This meant that Xian also had a super terrifying power behind him. Muyo said solemnly, "Then are we just going to let it go? The ancient emperor is the Range Master's grandson." Gu Qin frowned slightly. "The ancient emperor? I don't know him. What does he have to do with our Devil Vein?" Muyo's face was filled with astonishment. Gu Qin looked at Muyo. "Remember, the ancient emperor has nothing to do with our Devil Vein." With that, he turned and left. To offend a genius who might have a terrifying power behind him for the sake of the ancient emperor, how stupid would that be? Muyo laughed bitterly and turned to leave. On the other side of the mountain peak, the Defying Ones stood silently. His eyes were closed and no one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, Gu Qin appeared by his side. The Defying Ones said softly, "I'm leaving." Gu Qin frowned slightly. "So soon?" The Defying Ones nodded. "They're here to pick me up." As he spoke, he looked into the distance. "I'm going to meet him." After he finished speaking, he had already disappeared. Gu Qin hesitated for a moment, then hurriedly led a group of Devil Vein experts to follow. Saint Meridian. Xian, who was fighting, suddenly stopped. In the next moment he left the illusory world with the Divine Elder and the rest. Above the Saint Meridian the space suddenly tore apart and the Defying Ones appeared. Xian looked at the Defying Ones and did not frown. This guy wouldn't be here to pick a fight with him again, right? Su Chong and the rest also frowned. Obviously they also thought that the Defying Ones was here to pick a fight with Xian. The Defying Ones looked at Xian. I'm leaving. Leaving? Xian was slightly taken aback. Where are you going? The Defying Ones thought for a moment and said, home. Xian said in a low voice, you're not from a devil vein? The Defying Ones nodded. I'm just temporarily tempering myself in a devil vein. Now that time is up, it's time for me to leave. Xian glanced at the Defying Ones and said, where are you from? The Defying Ones replied, Eternal Night. Xian frowned slightly. Eternal Night? The Defying Ones frowned as well. You've never heard of it? Xian blinked. Have you heard of the Milky Way? The Defying Ones shook his head. Never. Xian said seriously, you've actually never heard of such an amazing world like the Milky Way? The Defying Ones looked at Xian. Is the Milky Way very amazing? Xian said seriously, very. The Defying Ones pondered for a moment and said, why haven't I heard of it? Xian smiled. It's normal that you haven't heard of it. Most people don't know about the Milky Way. The Defying Ones said, I'm a little curious. Brother Yi, can you tell me about how amazing that place is? Xian was silent for a moment before saying, there's a terrifying expert there. He's called the Strongest Destiny. Now that she's there, the Milky Way is protected by her. It's the strongest world in the entire universe. The Strongest Destiny. The Defying Ones frowned again. I've never heard of it either. Xian was about to speak when the distant sky suddenly split open. The next moment, a group of experts in black armor appeared above the holy vein. There were 32 of them. And among them 30 of them were telekinesis realm. This wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that the two leaders were actually Daoming realm. Seeing this scene, Xian's face immediately darkened. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. Telekinesis realm. Damn, this map is too fast. Who can withstand it? Faster see. Faster see. Faster see. Chapter 2047. With the appearance of those experts, Su Chong and the others' expressions changed drastically. Who was this defying walker? In the sky, the leading Daoming realm expert walked slowly to the defying walker and bowed slightly. Young master. The defying walker nodded and looked at Xian. See you later. Xian smiled. See you later. The defying walker nodded slightly and looked at Gu Qin, the demonic veins leader. He opened his palm and a black ancient book slowly floated to Gu Qin. Thank you for taking care of me these days. This is a small token of my appreciation. Please accept it, Gu Qin. Gu Qin hesitated for a moment and then put away the ancient book. If you have time in the future, come back and take a look. The defying walker smiled. Definitely. As he spoke, he looked at Xian. Brother Yi, if you have the chance, come to Eternal Night Continent to play. There are countless geniuses there, it's suitable for you. Xian smiled. If I have the chance, I will definitely go. The defying walker nodded and did not say anything else. He turned and walked slowly towards the sky. The Daoming realm expert glanced at Xian, then turned and followed. Before long, the defying walker and his group disappeared into the horizon. In the sky, Gu Qin glanced at Xian. At this moment, Xian suddenly asked, Gu Qin, I have a question to ask. Is Ancient Emperor from your demonic vein? Ancient Emperor? Gu Qin frowned. What Ancient Emperor? Xian frowned. You don't know him? Gu Qin shook his head. I don't know him. There is no one called Ancient Emperor in my demonic vein. Young master, you must have recognized the wrong person. Xian glanced at Gu Qin. Could Ancient Emperor be pretending to be from the demonic vein? At this moment, Gu Qin said, Young Master Yi, if you have the chance, come to demonic vein to play. Farewell. As he spoke, he turned and disappeared into the horizon. In the same place, Xian was silent for a moment before shaking his head and smiling. He looked at Su Chong. Senior, what is Eternal Night Continent? Su Chong hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. I don't know. Xian said solemnly. You don't know either? Su Chong smiled bitterly. That should be a more advanced civilization. Xian was silent. At this time God Mu suddenly said, "Are you leaving?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Not for now." As he spoke he looked at the divine elder and the other two. "Elders, let's continue our cultivation." Elder Shen nodded, "All right." After saying that, the four of them disappeared on the spot. At this moment Mugu suddenly asked, "Where did he come from?" Su Chong said softly, "Did you see his expression just now?" Mugu looked at Su Chong. "What expression?" Su Chong smiled bitterly. When he saw the experts behind the defying ones, he wasn't the least bit surprised or fearful. Mugu and Mu Shen's expressions became solemn when they heard this. Why wasn't Yi Xian surprised? Why weren't they afraid? Obviously, there was only one answer, and that was the force behind Yi Xian was not any weaker than the defying ones. Su Chong suddenly said softly, "He should be leaving soon." Mugu nodded. "I wonder if he will go to eternal night." Mugu did not speak. In the void world, Yi Xian was still fighting with the divine elder and the other two. He was still fighting 1 against 3. He was still being suppressed by the divine elder and the other two. However, the more he fought, the more excited he became. A battle of life and death was the easiest way to stimulate a person's potential. During this period of time his body had been shattered no less than 100 times. If he was careless, his body would be directly shattered. Of course, the three of them were sparring partners and had no intention of destroying his divine soul. Even so, Yi Xian's mind was tense. This time he was also very tense and did not dare to be careless. As for the divine elder and the other two, they were also starting to feel a little strained. Although Yi Xian was being suppressed by the three of them, Yi Xian was getting stronger and stronger as he fought. Facing those swords of Yi Xian, they did not dare to be careless at all. 2 hours later, the four of them stopped and began to sum up. The divine elder was the first to speak. "Your reaction is very fast. Now you can barely resist the three of us. However, you have to understand that the best defense is offense. If you keep defending, you will only give us the opportunity to attack you. Do you understand?" Yi Xian nodded. "I know that. However, the three of you are cooperating too well. I can't find any flaws." Elder Qiu smiled. "When I saw you fighting with the defying ones, you used a total of 6 swords, right?" Yi Xian nodded. Elder Qiu thought for a while and said, "Those 6 swords were casually used by you, right?" Yi Xian nodded again. Elder Qiu smiled. "Why don't you create another sword skill?" Yi Xian was astounded. "Create another sword skill?" Elder Qiu nodded. "With your current strength, when you condense the power of the myriad world, your limit is 6 strikes. Moreover, I've discovered that the speed at which you strike with your sword is extremely fast. If your speed is a little faster and you can strike with 6 strikes in an instant, the power of the 6 strikes will merge into a single point and break through a single area. Then the power of your 6 strikes will greatly increase." Yi Xian fell into deep thought. Elder Qiu continued, "All of your sword skills are very powerful, and all of them have their own unique advantages. You can combine them to create a new sword skill, because your split swordplay isn't quite enough for now." Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. "Can I?" Elder Qiu smiled. "Let's try." The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. "Let's try." Elder Qiu and the other two retreated 3 kilometers away. Yi Xian closed his eyes slowly and pressed his left thumb against the hilt of his sword, ready to strike. At this moment the 3 of them suddenly disappeared. Almost at the same time, Yi Xian pressed his thumb against the hilt of his sword. Swoosh! A sword pierced through the air. Almost at the same time, another sword flew out of Yi Xian's scabbard, followed by another sword. 3 swords in a single thought. All 3 swords carried his own sword momentum and aura. Boom! 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 In the distance the 3 swords suddenly shattered. At the same time, Elder Qiu and the other 2 retreated almost 3 kilometers away. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw this. This was the first time he had the upper hand since he fought with Elder Qiu and the other 2. In the distance, Elder Qiu glanced at his right hand. There was a deep sword mark on his right arm. If that sword had been slightly stronger, his arm would have been gone. Looking at Yi Xian, Elder Qiu said with a smile, "Your sword can go even faster, right?" Yi Xian nodded, "Yes." His instant sword of life and death hadn't reached his limit, and it could be faster. Meanwhile, the divine elder said, "Again." Yi Xian nodded, "All right." As soon as he finished speaking, another sword appeared in his scabbard. Yi Xian couldn't bring them to Xiao Tao's world. After all, the world within Xiao Ta's body couldn't endure their strength. However, it didn't matter to him now. Presently he didn't rely so much on the green profound sword, the energy of his bloodline and Xiao Ta. 3 months later. In the world of nothingness, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground while the 3 divine elders stood before him. A short while later Yi Xian stood up and gazed at the 3 divine elders. In the next moment the 3 of them vanished on the spot. Meanwhile Yi Xian flicked his thumb lightly. Hiss. 6 rays of light tore through the surroundings. Bang, bang, bang. 3 explosions resounded, and then the 3 divine elders were blasted over 30 kilometers away. After the 3 of them stopped, their right hands were completely severed. Not only that, but their bodies were covered in sword wounds, which were caused by the sword qi that splashed on them. Presently they couldn't get close to Yi Xian at all. If it was a one-on-one battle, then they wouldn't be a match for Yi Xian at all. Meanwhile, Elder Mu, who led the group, spoke softly. If these 6 attacks of yours are coupled with the energy of the myriad of worlds and worlds that day, I'm afraid you'll be able to instantly annihilate us. The Divine Elder and Elder Qiu had solemn expressions on their faces. Just as Elder Mu had said, if Yi Xian utilized the energy of the myriad of worlds and worlds, then its strength would be a few times stronger than it was now. Meanwhile, Elder Mu spoke abruptly. According to what I know, you have a special sword, right? Yi Xian nodded. He opened his palm and the green profound sword appeared in his grasp. Elder Mu glanced at the green profound sword. Do you want to use this sword to test the might of your newly created sword technique? Yi Xian blinked. Against the 3 of you? Elder Mu nodded. We want to witness the might of this sword as well. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, Elder Mu, this sword is quite ferocious. Elder Mu smiled. It's fine. We'll give it a try. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, all right. Actually, he wanted to give it a try as well. Yi Xian gazed at Elder Mu and the others. Seniors, be careful. Elder Mu smiled. Bring it on. Yi Xian closed his eyes slowly, and then he pressed his thumb lightly against the hilt of the green profound sword, causing it to suddenly fly forward. In an instant the entire world of nothingness was obliterated. The expressions of Elder Mu and the others changed drastically, and they hurriedly attacked in unison. Bang! Along with an explosion, Elder Mu and the others were blasted over 100 kilometers back. When they stopped moving, only their souls remained. Moreover, their souls were vanishing at an extremely terrifying speed. Their souls would be obliterated in a few breaths of time at most, and they would be completely obliterated. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he hurriedly utilized the green profound sword to suppress their souls. At this moment, Elder Mu and the others were still in a state of shock because they'd almost been obliterated. Elder Mu gazed at Yi Xian with an extremely solemn expression. Your sword. Yi Xian gazed at the green profound sword in his hand. Actually, he was quite surprised because the might of this sword had slightly exceeded his expectations as well. After he improved his strength and utilized the green profound sword, it felt like he was like a tiger that had grown wings. It was extremely terrifying. Moreover, he hadn't even utilized the energy of his bloodline and the energy of the universe. If he were to utilize all of them, then he was confident in his ability to instantly annihilate a Dao Radiance Realm expert. Meanwhile, Elder Mu shook his head and smiled. We're unable to help you anymore. Yi Xian bowed respectfully to them. He respected the 3 of them from the bottom of his heart. The Divine Elder smiled. Are you leaving? Yi Xian nodded. I'm going to look for stronger experts. The Divine Elder hesitated for a moment and said, I have a presumptuous request. Yi Xian smiled. Please speak. The Divine Elder spoke in a low voice. Can you leave an inheritance of your sword Dao here? Perhaps an outstanding genius in the sword Dao like you will appear in our saint bloodline many years from now. Yi Xian thought for a moment. All right. The Divine Elder and the others hurriedly bowed slightly to Yi Xian. Thank you. Chapter 2048. Sword Dao Inheritance. Yi Xian's sword Dao inheritance was no ordinary sword Dao. If Yi Xian left a part of his inheritance here as long as the sacred bloodline was used well, then the sacred bloodline might produce 1 or even more sword Dao experts in the future. Sword Dao had always been the sacred bloodline's weakest area because the sacred bloodline had never produced a particularly powerful swordsman. When they learned that Yi Xian was willing to leave a part of sword Dao inheritance in the sacred bloodline, Su Chong and the others were extremely excited. The Divine Elder and the others cared about the inheritance, but Su Chong cared about the fate. Today he had sown a good karma and he would reap good karma in the future. This was what he cared about the most. After Yi Xian left the sacred bloodline, he directly left the sacred bloodline. In the starry sky, Yi Xian, who was about to leave, suddenly turned his head and saw a woman standing not far to his right. It was Goddess Mu. Seeing Goddess Mu, Yi Xian was slightly stunned, then smiled and said, "Miss Goddess Mu." Goddess Mu looked at Yi Xian. "Are you going to Eternal Night?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "I don't know. In any case, I will keep moving forward to follow in my father's footsteps." Goddess Mu walked in front of Yi Xian. "Follow in your father's footsteps?" Yi Xian nodded. Goddess Mu thought about it, then said, "I am very curious about your background." Yi Xian said with a smile, "I just have an invincible father and younger sister. Oh, I also have a sworn brother. As for the rest, I don't seem to have much." Goddess Mu looked at Yi Xian. "How invincible are you?" Yi Xian said seriously, "Do you think I am strong?" Goddess Mu nodded, "Very strong." Yi Xian thought about it, then said, "I should be able to take 3 sword strikes from my father at most." Xiao Ta, Goddess Mu frowned, "Only 3 sword strikes?" Yi Xian nodded, "Terrifying, right?" Goddess Mu said solemnly, "Is your father a manifestation realm expert?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "I don't know either." Mu Shen thought for a moment and said, "Will he come back?" Yi Xian looked around, then smiled and said, "When I come back in the future, I will definitely come here to see you." God Mu nodded. "All right." As she spoke, she opened her palm and a token appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was puzzled. "This is..." The Harmony God replied, "Those who possess this token are my direct disciples. Even though we are not master and disciple, we are master and disciple in name, am I right?" Yi Xian thought for a moment before taking the token. "Miss Peace, we will meet again." With that, he turned around and flew up on his sword, disappearing into the starry sky in the blink of an eye. God Mu looked at the starry sky far away, thinking about something. At the end of the distant starry sky, Yi Xian, who was riding on his sword, suddenly turned his head to look. Not far away, an afterimage swept over. Yi Xian was stunned. The person was God Ai. God Ai rushed to Yi Xian and said hurriedly, "Brother Yi, wait for me." Yi Xian smiled. "Are you here to send me off?" God Ai shook his head. "No. I'm here to go with you." Yi Xian was slightly stunned. "Go with me." God Ai nodded. "I want to follow you for a period of time." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Why?" God Ai hesitated for a moment and said, "I just want to follow you, big brother." Yi Xian smiled. "You might get beaten up if you follow me." God Ai said seriously, "I'm not afraid." Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "Then let's go together." God Ai nodded. "Big brother, please." Yi Xian was speechless. On the other side, Destiny's Child looked at the starry sky, thinking about something. At this moment, Su Chong appeared beside Destiny's Child. He looked at Destiny's Child and said with a smile, "Aren't you going with them?" In fact, he also hoped that Destiny's Child would follow Yi Xian. After all, if God Ai followed Yi Xian, he would gain the benefits of free transformation. Destiny's Child said calmly, "Does Master want me to be like God Ai and be someone else's follower?" Su Chong sighed softly. "You know that's not what I mean." Destiny's Child slowly closed his eyes. "I won't be worse than them. Let's wait and see." After saying that, he turned and left. On the spot, Su Chong sighed softly and left. In the depths of the starry sky, Yi Xian looked at God Ai beside him. "Have you fully grasped the inheritance?" God Ai nodded. "I've basically grasped it." Yi Xian smiled. "How do you feel?" God Ai said in a deep voice, "Free transformation. Very, very strong." Yi Xian was curious. "How strong is it?" God Ai thought about it and said, "Very, very strong." Yi Xian was speechless. God Ai looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Brother Yi, I've already reached the Daoming realm." Daoming. Yi Xian was stunned. Then he sized up God Ai. However, God Ai was still at the telekinesis realm. God Ai said again, "I've hidden my realm." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "You've reached the Daoming realm so quickly?" God Ai nodded. "However, I've reached a bottleneck. To reach free transformation there are many harsh requirements. For example, the first one requires a huge amount of spiritual energy to support it. Unfortunately, the only star vein in our universe has been taken by that defying one. What a pity. Xian said, is your current goal to find a star vein? God Eye nodded. However, this is very difficult. Because only those top forces should have star veins. It's too difficult for me to get one. As he spoke, he looked at Xian. Xian's eyelids twitched. Why are you looking at me? I don't have a star vein either. God Eye hesitated for a moment and said, Brother, why don't we snatch one? Xian's face darkened. Do you want to get beaten up? God Eye thought for a moment and said, that's true. Sigh, what a headache. Xian said, the best way is to join a superforce and let them nurture you and help you reach free transformation. I believe that if you can reach free transformation, many forces will be willing to help you. God Eye nodded. That's the only way. As he spoke, he looked into the distance. Brother Yi, are we going to everlasting night? Xian shook his head. I don't know. God Eye looked at Xian. You don't know? Xian said with a smile, wherever we go. God Eye. In the starry sky, the two raised their speed to the limit. Half a month later, Xian and God Eye felt a headache because they had passed through dozens of star fields in the past half a month. However, these star fields were dead and there was no life or civilization. At a certain spot in the silent starry sky, God's Eye glanced at the surroundings and said, Brother Yi, have we gotten lost? Xian looked around and nodded. I think it's possible. God Eye. At this moment, several powerful auras suddenly appeared in the distance. Seeing this scene, the two were stunned at first and then they were delighted. They finally saw living people. At this moment, the space-time in front of them suddenly tore open and the next moment, 3 men in black robes walked out. All 3 of them were at telekinesis. The leading man in black robes sized up Xian and God Eye. You two are. Xian cupped his fists. We are lost. May I ask where this is? Lost. The black-robed man frowned slightly. Where are all of you from? Xian replied, the great skyscraper region. The black-robed man shook his head. I've never heard of it. Xian smiled. Where are we? The black-robed man replied, this is the daylight plane. The daylight plane? Xian frowned slightly. Is it related to the eternal night plane? The black-robed man's eyes narrowed slightly, and a strand of his divine sense locked onto Xian. You know of the eternal night plane. It was filled with hostility. God Eye was about to speak when Xian smiled and said, I've only heard of it but I've never been there. The black-robed man gazed at Xian and didn't speak. Xian smiled. We really are from the great skyscraper region. The black-robed man fell silent for a moment before he said, continue forward and you'll arrive at the daylight plane. However, I don't recommend that you go there because your origins are unknown, and the daylight plane might not allow you to enter. Xian was puzzled. Why? The black-robed man glanced at Xian, but he didn't speak another word. He just led the others behind him away. God Eye gazed at Xian. What's going on? Xian spoke indifferently. The daylight plane and the eternal night plane probably aren't on good terms. God Eye spoke solemnly. Then are we still going? Xian smiled. Let's go. God Eye hesitated for a moment and said, didn't that person say? Xian smiled. We can sneak in. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished on the spot with God Eye. Around 4 hours later, Xian and God Eye entered an unknown region of the starry sky. Both Xian and God Eye were quite surprised when they entered this region. There was an extremely dazzling ray of white light at the end of their field of vision, and it just traversed the depths of the starry sky. God Eye glanced at it. What's that? Xian shook his head. I don't know. At this moment, several divine consciousnesses swept in their direction. Xian and the God's Eye immediately hid. The 2 divine consciousnesses scanned the location where Xian and the God's Eye were, and soon the 2 divine consciousnesses disappeared. Xian glanced into the distance and then disappeared with God Eye. Around 2 hours later, both of them arrived in front of an ancient city. In front of the city gate, Xian glanced at the top of the city gate and there were 3 large words. Daylight City. Daylight. After Xian entered the city with God Eye, both of them found that the city was very prosperous. Not only that, but many of the cultivators in the city were very strong. Although there weren't telekinesis realm experts everywhere, there were still many. From time to time they would encounter a telekinesis realm expert. Of course they didn't encounter a single Daoming realm expert. God Eye looked at Yi Xian. Brother Yi, what do we do now? Yi Xian looked around and then said, let's first figure out this daylight realm. God Eye asked, how do we do that? Yi Xian looked at God Eye. Can you not be so ambiguous with your words? God Eye frowned slightly. Is there a problem with this sentence? Yi Xian. Ignoring God Eye, Yi Xian's divine sense swept around and the next moment he was stunned. There was actually a familiar aura. Who was it? P.S. Erupt tomorrow. Chapter 2049. Yi Xian vanished on the spot with God Eye, and it didn't take long for them to arrive at a spacious square. At this moment the square was filled with a sea of people. Yi Xian looked into the distance and saw a familiar person on a stone platform in the distance. Heaven Loathsome. Yi Xian hadn't expected to encounter Heaven Loathsome here. What's this woman doing in the daylight plane? Meanwhile, Heaven Loathsome seemed to sense something and looked towards the crowd. She was slightly stunned when she saw Yi Xian, and her eyes were filled with astonishment. Obviously she hadn't expected to encounter Yi Xian here. Heaven Loathsome hesitated for a moment, and then she stood up and appeared in front of Yi Xian in the next moment. What are you doing here? Yi Xian smiled. I was wandering around for a while and then I came here. Heaven Loathsome frowned slightly. Wandering around? Yi Xian nodded. Heaven Loathsome fell silent for a moment. Do you know where this is? Yi Xian said, the daylight plane. Heaven Loathsome nodded. Yi Xian suddenly asked, what are you doing here? Heaven Loathsome glanced around and said, let's go somewhere else? Yi Xian nodded, all right. He really wanted to get to know this daylight plane well. The three of them were about to leave when a man suddenly appeared by Heaven Loathsome's side. He glanced at Yi Xian and God Eye and then he smiled. Heaven Loathsome, who are they? Heaven Loathsome turned to look at the man and then she slapped him. Slap. The man was blasted away before he could even react. Yi Xian and God Eye were stunned. Heaven Loathsome glanced coldly at the man. Heaven Loathsome? Do we know each other very well? As soon as she finished speaking she looked at Yi Xian. Let's go. Yi Xian was speechless. The man glanced resentfully at Heaven Loathsome from afar, and no one knew what he was thinking. On the other side Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, Heaven's Malice, who is he? Heaven's Loathsome said flatly, he's the son of an elder in Daybreak City. He's like you when he sees a woman. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Tianyan, don't talk nonsense. What do you mean by the same as me? Fuck Yi Xian. Heaven's Loathsome interrupted Yi Xian. I'm saying that he's a second-generation heir just like you. Yi Xian was speechless. Before long Heaven's Loathsome brought them to a restaurant. Heaven's Loathsome picked up the bowl of wine in front of him and gulped it down. Then he looked at Yi Xian and said, Are you here to cause trouble in the White Day realm again? Yi Xian's face darkened. What are you talking about? Then what are you doing here? Heaven's Loathsome asked. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, Heaven Hatred, what sort of place is the Daybreak Plane? After a moment of silence Heaven's Loathsome began to explain to Yi Xian. Actually, this universe was called the Celestial Pole Universe. In this universe there were two superpowers. One was Evernight City and the other was Daybreak City. The two superpowers had always been enemies. Their grudges were so deep that it was indescribable. Either way they would definitely fight when they met. Yi Xian said in a low voice, You joined the White Day realm? Heaven's Loathsome nodded. I had to get some cultivation resources. In other words, star veins. Yi Xian said in a low voice, What realm are you at now? He asked because he couldn't see through Heaven's Loathsome realm. Heaven's Loathsome said in a low voice, Enlightened. Fuck. Yi Xian jumped up. You've enlightened? Are you kidding me? Heaven's Loathsome looked at Yi Xian and said, Am I useless in your eyes? Yi Xian smiled sheepishly and said, Of course not. It's just that. You're too fast. You should know that when we parted you were just in the inner circle. Heaven's Loathsome drank another bowl of wine and said, Aren't you growing fast as well? Yi Xian said in a low voice, Did you join the Daybreak City for the Star Vein? Heaven's Loathsome nodded and said, Yes. Yi Xian asked hurriedly, Did you get it? Heaven's Loathsome shook his head and said, It's very difficult. Yi Xian frowned and said, You're such a monster. Why didn't the Daybreak City nurture you? Heaven's Loathsome looked at Yi Xian and said, Do you know how many Daoming realm cultivators there are in the Daybreak City? Xian shook his head. Heaven's Loathsome raised a finger and said, "More than 100. And all of them wanted to obtain the star vein. However, in the entire Daybreak City, there are only 9 star veins left, and for a Daoming realm cultivator to reach the free transformation realm, they need at least 1 star vein's spiritual chi, some even need 2. Moreover, there is no guarantee of success." Then she shook her head and said, "Under these circumstances, the conditions to get the star vein are very, very harsh." God, I couldn't help but ask, "How harsh?" Heaven's Loathsome said, "The first condition is to kill 10 Daoming realm cultivators in the Eternal Darkness faction. The second condition is to be number 1 on the God list. That is, the one who wins the competition among more than 100 Daoming realm cultivators will have the chance to get the star vein. The third condition is to swear on your soul and consciousness that you will be loyal to the Daybreak City for the rest of your life. If you disobey, your soul will be destroyed." Hearing this, God Eye's expression immediately turned a little ugly. Xian said softly, "It's a bit difficult." Heaven's Loathsome said, "It's more than difficult. It's hopeless. But there's no other way. Actually, there's another way to get the star vein." Xian was curious and asked, "What kind?" Heaven's Loathsome said, "Monster. A true super monster, the kind that can shock the entire Daybreak City. Daybreak City will open a back door for such a monster." Xian said solemnly, "As far as I know, the Imperial God gathered the star vein on his own. Why can't you do the same?" Heaven's Vexation said solemnly, "I know a little about this Imperial God that you speak of. There are also some legends about him here. However, no one knows how he managed to condense the star veins. Furthermore, some people say that he didn't condense the star veins himself and that he got lucky. Of course, no one knows what it is exactly." Xian looked at God Eye and God Eye shook his head. "There are no records about the star vein in Master's inheritance." Xian fell silent. He hadn't expected the star vein to be so difficult to get. Meanwhile, Heaven's Loathsome suddenly looked at Xian. "King Kaoshan, can I borrow a star vein from you?" Xian looked at Tianyi. "Where would I get a star vein? I don't even have one." Heaven's Loathsome said, "You can ask your father. He definitely has one." Xian spoke flatly, "I don't know where he is right now." Heaven's Loathsome frowned slightly when he heard this. Xian laughed, "Don't even think about it. I have to rely on myself." Heaven's Loathsome puckered his lips and didn't say anything. Xian looked at God Eye. "It seems like the path of embodiment transformation is going to be difficult for you." God Eye fell silent for a while before he said, "Big brother, I'll follow you. You think of a way." Xian's face darkened. "I'll think of a way for you. Do you think I'm a god?" God Eye spoke solemnly, "In any case, I'll follow you." Xian was speechless. Meanwhile, Heaven's Loathsome said, "If you want to join the Daytime Alliance, you have to think it through. Once you do, you'll be dragged into the enmity between Daytime City and Evernight City. At that time, even if you don't kill the members of Evernight City, they'll kill you. Think it through." Xian turned around to look at God Eye. "What do you think?" God Eye hesitated for a moment and said, "What about you?" Xian shook his head. "I don't need star veins because my goal isn't embodiment transformation." God Eye was puzzled. "Why?" Xian chuckled. "I have my own path to take." God Eye hesitated for a moment and said, "Then I have no choice but to join Daytime City." Xian spoke solemnly, "You have to think it through." God Eye laughed bitterly. "I have no other choice. Isn't that right?" Xian gazed at Heaven's Loathsome. Heaven's Loathsome spoke flatly. "He's at the Daoming realm, so it won't be difficult for him to join Daytime City. However, obtaining star veins will be very difficult." Xian said, "I have no choice but to join for now." Heaven's Loathsome gazed at Xian. "What about you? Are you interested in Daybreak City?" Xian shook his head. Heaven's Loathsome nodded and didn't speak further. Meanwhile, God Eye spoke abruptly. "Brother Yi, why don't you join Daytime City with us? Join now and work hard. Perhaps you'll be able to obtain star veins in the future." Heaven's Loathsome gazed at God Eye. "You aren't familiar with King Kaoshan, right?" God Eye was puzzled. "Why do you ask?" Heaven's Loathsome shook his head slightly. "You're the one who needs to work hard, not him. If you don't believe me, you can ask him if he's ever worried about cultivation resources." God Eye gazed at Xian. Xian rubbed his nose. "I don't think so. Although his journey was bumpy, he didn't have to worry about cultivation resources at all. He didn't have to worry about techniques either. God, I was speechless. Suddenly, a man walked into the restaurant. It was the man who'd been beaten up by Heaven's Loathsome earlier. Heaven's Loathsome frowned slightly when he saw the man. There was an old man by his side. The old man walked slowly to Zhou Xian and the others. He looked at Heaven's Loathsome. Miss Heaven's Loathsome, how did my son offend you? Why did you humiliate him in public? Heaven's Loathsome raised his bowl and took a sip before he said, Ask your son if I told him not to bother me at the beginning. The old man looked at Heaven's Loathsome. Everyone loves beauty. What's wrong with him wanting to befriend you, Miss Heaven's Loathsome? Heaven's Loathsome looked at the old man. You're right, but I don't want to befriend him. I'm pissed that he's come to bother me again and again. Do you understand? The old man glared at Heaven's Loathsome. Heaven's Loathsome suddenly stood up and stared at the old man. If you're not happy, we'll fight one-on-one in the life and death realm. We'll fight to the death. As long as you agree, we'll go right now. Once we're in the life and death realm, I'll kill you first and then your son. The old man narrowed his eyes. Are you that confident, Miss Heaven's Loathsome? Heaven's Loathsome was about to speak when the old man's son suddenly said, You don't want me to call you Heaven's Loathsome, so why can he call you Heaven's Loathsome? He pointed at Zhou Xian as he spoke. Zhou Xian. Heaven's Loathsome glanced at the man. His dad is more awesome than yours, understand? Zhou Xian. Chapter 2050. The man was slightly stunned when he heard her, and then he spoke fiercely, You humiliated me. She glanced at him with disdain and then she gazed at the old man. Are you going to fight or not? She clenched her right fist slowly as she spoke and she was ready to fight. However, it still depended on the old man because fighting was not allowed in this place. Even though she had a bad temper, it didn't represent that she was stupid. The old man's expression was quite unsightly when he heard her fight. Truthfully speaking, he wasn't confident in his ability to do so. Even though Heaven Loathing hadn't been in Daybreak City for long, she was quite famous in the city. Because she'd challenged an expert on the divine rankings as soon as she arrived and she'd even won. Now she was ranked at the 16th position on the divine rankings. That was a very high ranking. The man was about to say something when Heaven Loathing suddenly turned around to look at him. A moment later, her hand clamped down on the man's throat. The old man's expression changed drastically. Heaven Loathing. What are you doing? A wisp of ferocity flashed through her eyes. What am I doing? Old bastard. That grandson of yours has repeatedly come to harass me, yet you didn't restrain him and instead brought him here to reason with me. Damn it. Since you don't teach your son properly, then I'll kill him and give birth to another one. As soon as she finished speaking, she clenched her right fist. Bang. The man was instantly obliterated. He'd been forcefully obliterated. Zhou Xian's eyelids twitched when he witnessed this scene. Damn it. She's still so hot-tempered. The old man's expression instantly became ferocious when he saw his son being killed, and he was just about to attack. Meanwhile, a white-robed man appeared here and he smiled. Elder you. The old man glanced at the young man, and then he frowned while a trace of fear could be seen in his eyes. The young man smiled. Elder you, if you want to fight, then please go to the life dimension with Miss Heaven Loathing. This isn't a place to fight. The old man spoke furiously. Didn't you see that she attacked first? The young man smiled. It wouldn't be a problem if you could kill Miss Heaven Loathing in an instant. After all, it's not destructive at all. The old man's expression instantly became unsightly, and he glanced coldly at Heaven Loathing. Just you wait. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. The young man looked at Heaven Vexation. Miss Heaven Vexation, please don't fight here next time. Thank you. With that he turned around and left. Heaven's Loathsome sat down and continued drinking. Zhou Xian looked at Heaven Loathsome. Who was that old man? He's an elder in Daylight City. He has some power but his strength isn't much. Zhou Xian said solemnly, If you do this, will he make things difficult for you? Heaven's Malignity's expression was calm. If he dares, I'll kill him. Zhou Xian was speechless. Heaven's Loathsome turned to look out the window and said softly, King Kaoshan, I know you like to keep a low profile. You like to pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. However, you'd better be more direct in this place. The law of the jungle here was even more blatant. If you don't act tough, there will be a lot of people bullying you. As soon as she finished speaking, she picked up the cup of wine in front of her and drank it in one gulp before she said, "Let's go." As soon as she finished speaking, she stood up and left. After taking 2 steps, she stopped and turned around to look at God's Eye. "Didn't you want to join Daybreak City? Why aren't you leaving?" God's Eye looked at Yi Xian and Yi Xian nodded slightly. God's Eye stood up and left with heaven's malignity. After the two of them left, Yi Xian picked up the cup of wine on the table and drank it in one gulp. He was about to leave when the young man in white robes from before walked over again. Yi Xian looked at the young man in white robes. "You are." The young man in white robes smiled and said, "Mu Chen, the owner of this restaurant." Yi Xian smiled and said, "What do you need?" Mu Chen sat in front of Yi Xian and opened his palm. A bottle of wine appeared on the table. He poured a bowl for Yi Xian and said, "Try it." Yi Xian didn't hold back and drank it in one gulp. As soon as it entered his stomach, a terrifying energy erupted from within him, but it was quickly absorbed by his body. Yi Xian was stunned. "What's this?" Mu Chen smiled and said, 10,000-year-old wine. There are only 2 jars in the entire Daybreak City. Yi Xian smiled and said, "If you have something to say, then feel free to speak." Mu Chen shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I just want to get to know you." Yi Xian gazed at Mu Chen and didn't say anything. Mu Chen suddenly opened his palm, and 2 wooden tokens appeared in front of Yi Xian. One was black and the other was white. Mu Chen said, "These are identity tokens. One is for Daybreak City and the other is for Eternal Night City. Sire can freely enter and exit Daybreak City and Eternal Night City. Not only that, both identities can provide young lord with some convenience." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I don't understand why you're doing this." Mu Chen smiled and said, "Young master isn't an ordinary person. I just want to form a good relationship with you, that's all." Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "I want to find out something." Mu Chen nodded and said, "Go on, young master." Yi Xian said, "Who's the most monstrous genius in the younger generation of Daybreak City?" Mu Chen glanced at Yi Xian and said, "Ting." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Can you tell me about it?" Mu Chen thought for a moment and said, "Do you know about the divine rankings?" Yi Xian nodded and said, "Miss Tianyan told me about it just now. Is he the first on the divine rankings?" Mu Chen smiled and said, "No." Yi Xian frowned slightly and said, "Then?" Mu Chen said softly, "He isn't the first on the divine rankings, but he defeated the first. On the other hand, he merely used less than a year to attain prana transformation from the telekinesis realm." Prana transformation. Yi Xian's expression was calm when he heard this, and he smiled and said, "He's attained prana transformation already?" Mu Chen nodded and said, "He and the Defiance of Eternal Night City are the most monstrous geniuses of this era. Someone has investigated them, and no matter if it's Eternal Night City or Daybreak City, their levels of monstrous geniuses are unprecedented. Now that the Defiant of Eternal Night City has returned, these 2 monstrous geniuses will fight sooner or later, and it might even be a battle between Daybreak City and Eternal Night City." Yi Xian nodded slightly and said, "I understand." As soon as he finished speaking, he drank another bowl of wine and said, "Farewell." As soon as he finished speaking, he stood up and left. However, he glanced at the right before he left. Mu Chen didn't ask him to stay. A woman appeared here after Yi Xian left, and she sat before Mu Chen and said, "He noticed me." Mu Chen grinned and said, "What's so surprising about that?" The woman gazed at Mu Chen and said, "Big brother, why did you become friends with him?" Mu Chen gazed at her and smiled. "Little girl, what do you think of him?" The woman hesitated for a moment and shook her head. "He's just a circle breaker. I can't see anything extraordinary about him." Mu Chen said softly, "He's extraordinary in every way." The woman looked at Mu Chen with a puzzled expression. Mu Chen smiled and said, "First, you should know Miss Tianyan's character. She doesn't treat anyone well, but her attitude towards this brother is very different. It's not exactly respectful, but it's at least polite. Second, when Elder Yu came to cause trouble for Miss Tianyan, he just watched from the side without a trace of fear. What does that mean? It means he doesn't respect Elder Yu at all." As he spoke, he picked up the bowl of wine in front of him and drank a mouthful. Then he continued, "Third, do you see the young man beside him? That young man was in the Daoming realm, and he obviously came from another place. This kind of person would definitely be a top-notch monstrous existence in other places, but he was very respectful to this brother, And that kind of respect was not fake. This kind of top monstrous genius will only respect those who are more monstrous than them. Fourth point. When I said that I wanted to befriend him and form a good relationship with him, he didn't seem surprised or suspicious at all. Why? Because he thinks it's a normal thing to do. As he spoke, his expression gradually turned solemn. Finally, he asked me about the most monstrous genius in Daylight City. Most people wouldn't ask such a question. Only the top monstrous geniuses would. Because they're only interested in people of the same level, just like Xianxia is only interested in contravening ones. Moreover, when I mentioned contravening ones in Xianxia, did you see his expression? Not only was he calm, but he was also smiling. That smile was filled with interest. In other words, he's interested in Xianxia. Hearing that, the woman's expression gradually turned solemn. Wuxia smiled and said, "This is a top genius from another world." The woman said in a deep voice, "Brother, how can a genius from another world fight Xianxia and contravening ones?" Wuxia shook his head. "Girl, how big is the universe? How big are Daylight City and Eternal Night City? Even Xianxia and contravening ones wouldn't dare to say they're the most monstrous genius in the entire universe, let alone us." After a moment of silence, the woman said, "Then brother, why don't you bring him to our Daylight City?" Wuxia said softly, "It's stupid to bring him here. Mujin, ask the people in the city to make things easier for Lady Tianyan and the young man who just joined our city." The woman nodded and said, "I understand." After saying that, she stood up and left. Wuxia looked out the window in the distance, thinking about something. After Zhou Xian left the restaurant, he left the Baizhou city directly. However, not long after, he frowned. At that moment, the space in front of him trembled slightly. The next moment, an old man appeared in front of him. This old man was the elder Yu who had appeared in the restaurant before. Zhou Xian looked at elder Yu and said with a smile, "Sir, are you looking for the wrong person?" Elder Yu stared at Zhou Xian and said, "I'm not looking for the wrong person. I'm looking for you." Zhou Xian was puzzled. "Why are you looking for me?" Elder Yu said coldly, "Aren't you in cahoots with Tianyan?" Zhou Xian was stunned. Then he smiled and said, "Tianyan killed your son. You should be looking for her. This has nothing to do with me. It doesn't make sense for you to look for me." Elder Yu stared at Zhou Xian and said, "You're weaker." Zhou Xian was stunned. The next moment he raised his left thumb. Before Elder Yu could react, a sword pierced through his forehead. Elder Yu looked at Zhou Xian in disbelief. Zhou Xian smiled and said, "Do you still think I'm a little brother?" Chapter 2051. At this moment, Elder Yu was completely stunned. He hadn't imagined that he would actually be instantly killed by this young man. After all, this young man was merely at the breakthrough realm. Such a realm of cultivation was like an ant to him. Yet now he'd actually been instantly killed. Zhou Xian didn't waste his breath on Elder Yu. The green sword absorbed Elder Yu's soul. Zhou Xian gazed silently at the green sword in his grasp. He'd utilized the green sword just now because he wanted to kill Elder Yu with a single strike. But he noticed that it wasn't necessary at all. Even though Elder Yu was at the Dao Radiance realm, he was actually very weak. So he should have been able to instantly kill Elder Yu even if he didn't utilize the green sword. Of course, besides his own strength, there was another reason, and it was because the old man had underestimated him. Since the beginning, Elder Yu hadn't taken him seriously at all. Under such circumstances and coupled with the fact that he was so close to Elder Yu, Xianxia had killed Elder Yu with a single strike. Zhou Xian was about to leave when a shapeless pressure suddenly descended from the sky. Zhou Xian frowned slightly. In the next moment, an old man appeared before Zhou Xian. He was from Daybreak City. The old man gazed at Zhou Xian. "You're from Eternal Night City." Zhou Xian shook his head. "No." The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why did you kill a member of my Daybreak City?" Zhou Xian smiled. "He wanted to kill me, so I was forced to retaliate." The old man stared at Zhou Xian silently, but his eyes were filled with vigilance. Right at this moment, a man appeared here. It was Wuxia. Wuxia glanced at Zhou Xian and laughed bitterly. "Young Master Yi, I never expected that we would meet again so soon." Zhou Xian shrugged. "I'm innocent. Elder Yu had a conflict with Miss Tianyan, so he vented his anger on me. I told him that I had nothing to do with the conflict between him and Miss Tianyan, but he wouldn't listen. Not only did he refuse to listen, he even tried to hit me. So I was forced to retaliate." "Forced to retaliate?" The corners of Mu Chen's mouth twitched. The old man's expression was extremely unsightly. Mu Chen suddenly said, "Elder Pavilion, go back." The old man hesitated for a moment before saying, "Second young master, this matter." Mu Chen said, "I'll handle it." The old man hesitated for a moment and he was just about to leave. Right at this moment, another man appeared here and his appearance was slightly similar to Mu Chen. The elder bowed slightly to the man, "Young master." This person was the eldest son of White Day City's city lord, Mu Qian. The man said with a smile, "Second brother, we can't just let this matter go." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian and said, "This man killed an elder of Daybreak City. I suspect that he is from Evernight City." Mu Qian frowned slightly. "It was Elder Yu who found trouble with him first." Mu Qian smiled, "Second brother, are you from Daybreak City?" After a moment of silence, Mu Qian turned around and looked at Yi Xian. "Young Master Yi, you can leave." Mu Qian narrowed his eyes. "What's wrong, second brother? Are you colluding with the people of Evernight City?" Mu Qian fell silent. He didn't explain because he knew that it was impossible to explain clearly to an idiot. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly chuckled and said, "I'm not from Evernight City." Mu Qian gazed at Yi Xian. "Do you think you can just because you say so?" Yi Xian grinned. "He came looking for trouble with me first." Mu Qian stared at Yi Xian. "Then you killed him?" Yi Xian nodded, "Yes." Mu Qian's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're very arrogant." Yi Xian chuckled. "I can't just stand by and do nothing if he wants to kill me, right?" Mu Qian smiled. "You said that he wanted to kill you. Do you have any proof?" Yi Xian blinked. "Do you intend to be unreasonable?" A wisp of disdain arose on the corners of Mu Qian's mouth. "Reason? In this world, the one with the bigger fist is the one in the right." Yi Xian suddenly flicked his thumb lightly. Before Mu Qian could even react, his head was directly sliced off, and a stream of blood spurted out from his neck like a fountain. Seeing this scene, Mu Qian's pupils constricted slightly. He knew that Yi Xian was very strong, but he didn't know that Yi Xian was strong to this extent. After all, his big brother was also at the Daoming realm. And a Daoming realm expert was killed just like that? The old man's expression changed greatly. He looked at Yi Xian, his eyes filled with vigilance. Yi Xian glanced at Mu Qian, who only had a soul left, and smiled. "I'm being reasonable because I'm benevolent towards you, not because I'm afraid of you. Do you understand?" Mu Qian, who was already a soul, stared at Yi Xian. "My father is the Daybreak City's city lord, and he's also a embodiment transformation realm expert." Yi Xian frowned. "I hate second generations like you the most in my life. You only know how to rely on your parents every day. Can you learn from me? Look at me, I don't rely on my father, I rely on my sister." Xiaota was speechless. Mu Qian gazed at Yi Xian. "Sir, I believe that this is a misunderstanding." However, Yi Xian shook his head. "It's too late." As soon as he finished speaking, the green profound sword suddenly entered Mu Qian's soul, and then Mu Qian was instantly absorbed completely. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the green profound sword returned to his grasp before he turned around and left. Suddenly, countless formidable auras shot into the sky from the distant Daybreak City. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot and he vanished into the horizon in the blink of an eye. The old man and Mu Qian were stunned when they saw this scene. He fled just like that. Meanwhile, a few dozen experts appeared here and they were led by a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man gazed towards the horizon. "He's from Eternal Night City?" Mu Qian shook his head and sighed softly. "He isn't from Eternal Night City, but that might not be the case now." The middle-aged man frowned slightly, and he remained silent for a moment before he said, "After him." As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately led all the experts in pursuit. Meanwhile, Shin Tong and Heavenly Loath appeared here as well. Heavenly Loath glanced towards the distance and then she gazed at Mu Qian. "Are all of you pursuing King Kaoshan?" Mu Qian frowned slightly. "King Kaoshan?" Heavenly Loath said, "That's Yi Xian." Mu Qian hesitated for a moment and asked, "Miss Heavenly Loath, what exactly is the background of this young Master Yi?" Heavenly Loath stared at Mu Qian. "Let me ask you, are all of you pursuing him?" Mu Qian nodded. "He killed Elder Yu and my older brother just now." "Alas." Heavenly Loath shook her head. "Idiot." As she spoke, she suddenly opened her palm and a command token appeared there. It was the identity token of Daybreak City. Heavenly Loath pointed with her finger. and the command token flew over to Mu Chen. Mu Chen was puzzled. Miss Heavenly Loathe you. Heavenly Loathe spoke indifferently. From this moment onward, I don't belong to Daybreak City. Mu Chen was astounded. Miss Heavenly Loathe you. Heavenly Loathe didn't waste her breath at all and she just turned around and left. Meanwhile, Mu Chen hurriedly stood in front of Heavenly Loathe and he gazed at her. Miss Heavenly Loathe, why? Heavenly Loathe glanced at Mu Chen. Why? Because all of you are courting death. Mu Chen spoke in a low voice. Why do you say that? Heavenly Loathe spoke indifferently. That idiot elder you will get all of you killed. As for you, if your influence is great enough, then I advise you to use it and stop the members of Daybreak City from pursuing him. Otherwise you'll regret it. No, it's your Daybreak City that will regret it. As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished into the distance. God Eye hesitated for a moment, and then he returned the command token to Mu Chen before he vanished into the horizon as well. Mu Chen remained silent for a moment on the spot and then he said, Investigate. Investigate his background. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. It didn't take long for Mu Chen to arrive at a pavilion in the city, and he bowed slightly to the pavilion. Grandfather. There was no reply from the pavilion. Mu Chen said again, Grandfather. A long time later, a voice resounded from within. Speak. Mu Chen spoke in a low voice. Moments later the voice rang out once more. Not interested. Mu Chen laughed wryly. Grandfather, this matter concerns the survival of Daybreak City. The voice within the pavilion said, You worry too much. You're too cautious. Besides, the other party has killed 2 people from Daybreak City, including your elder brother. His actions are a clear sign of contempt for our city. Whether he's from Evernight or not, he must be killed. Otherwise, how will the others in the city look at us? Mu Chen remained silent. The voice continued. Moreover, if we don't kill this person and allow him to join Evernight, won't our Daybreak City gain another powerful enemy? Little fellow, things have come to this. Since we've already offended him, we must kill him and not seek peace. Besides, will he join Daybreak City if you seek peace? He won't. There's already a rift between him and Daybreak City, understand? Mu Chen didn't say anything. The voice continued. You may leave. Mu Chen bowed slightly then turned to leave. Mu Chen arrived in front of a stone staircase and gazed at the distant horizon, feeling uneasy. Both Yi Xian's and Heaven's Malice's attitudes made him feel that this matter wasn't as simple as it seemed. Could an ordinary power nurture a terrifying genius like Yi Xian? That was obviously impossible. This also meant that there was a terrifying superpower behind Yi Xian. This power was an uncertain factor. Mu Chen gazed at the distant horizon, his eyes filled with deep worry. But at this moment he was powerless to change anything. Just as his grandfather had said, there was no room for compromise at this point. On the other side, Yi Xian was riding on his sword, pushing his speed to the limit. Behind him was a group of powerful Dao Brightness Realm experts. He wasn't afraid of them, but he was afraid of being ganged up on. Moreover, he had been standing right in front of Daybreak City's gates. If they were to fight, that place would be disadvantageous to him. Before long, Yi Xian arrived in the vast starry skies. Yi Xian looked around. The next moment he headed straight for the Evernight realm. Behind him, the middle-aged man stared into the distance. He's going to the Evernight realm. Stop him. As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his speed to the limit, and the experts behind him also increased their speed. At the end of the starry skies, a black-robed elder suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The black-robed elder narrowed his eyes. Who are you? Yi Xian hurriedly said, The Daybreak Realm is attacking. Quick, call someone out to kill them. The black-robed elder. Chapter 2052. Day City is attacking? The black-robed old man was slightly stunned when he heard Yi Xian, and then his expression instantly changed when he looked behind Yi Xian. After that he turned around and vanished on the spot. Yi Xian was stunned. Did he flee? Right at this moment the black-robed old man appeared in front of him again, and there were actually over 100 people behind the old man. All of them were at the Daoming realm. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched when he witnessed this scene. Eternal Night City is quite ferocious. They were able to gather so many experts in such a short period of time. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man who led the group from Day City's forces stopped moving, and he spoke solemnly when he saw the experts of Eternal Night City behind Yi Xian. You really are from Eternal Night City. Xian smiled. As you wish. The middle-aged man took a deep and long glance at Xian, and then he gazed at the black-robed old man by Xian's side. Zhou Xian, good job. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and led the others away. They had no other choice but to attack Xian just like that because he'd fled to Eternal Night City, right? At this moment, Xian, who was in the distance, suddenly attacked. A sword howl resounded, and then a flying sword slashed through the battlefield. The middle-aged man's pupils constricted, and then he swiftly turned around and smashed his fist forward. Bang! An expanse of light erupted, and then the middle-aged man was blasted over 30 kilometers away. Moreover, his body was instantly blasted into pieces as soon as he stopped moving. Both sides were stunned when they witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, Xian suddenly shouted, "Kill them!" As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. Zhou Xian and the others were stunned by this scene. Do we fight? Zhou Xian and the others practically didn't hesitate to charge forward as well. Because the experts of Daoist City had charged towards Xian as soon as Xian had charged forward. However, Xian hadn't charged forward, and he'd charged forward for a moment before retreating towards Zhou Xian and the others. The battle began. It had to be said that this battle had come too suddenly. No one was mentally prepared for it. They could only fight. Of course, both sides wanted to fight. At this moment, it could be said that when enemies met, their eyes were exceptionally red. Xian did not slip away right away. Instead, he kept a sneak attack. He flicked his thumb from time to time, and every time he flicked his thumb, a strong man from the Daylight City would be beheaded. In less than a few breaths of time, nearly 7 Daoming realm experts were killed. In the distance, the middle-aged man in the lead noticed this scene, and his expression changed drastically. Retreat. 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 The experts of Daybreak City retreated as they fought, because they had also discovered how terrifying Xian was. They couldn't block Xian's flying sword at all. As for the experts of Evernight City, they became more and more excited as they fought, because they had completely suppressed the experts of Daybreak City. Xian suddenly said, "Don't let them escape." As he spoke, another flying sword slashed out. In the distance, a Daoming realm expert wasn't able to dodge in time, and his forehead was pierced by Xian's sword while his soul was instantly absorbed by the green profound sword. He was using the green profound sword this time because he wanted to kill. Moreover, these people were great nourishment for the green profound sword, so he naturally couldn't miss it. The middle-aged man gazed at Xian with astonishment. Xian suddenly gazed at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically, and he was just about to leave when a sword slashed towards him. The middle-aged man was horrified, and he clenched his right fist tightly before smashing it forward. Even though it was only his soul, the strength behind this punch was still terrifying. Formidable energy surged out from his fist, and in an instant the space in front of him started to seethe. Unfortunately, his opponent was Xian, and it was Xian who was using the green profound sword. As the green profound sword slashed down, the middle-aged man's formidable energy was instantly dispersed. Bang! A huge amount of energy was instantly dispersed, and then the green profound sword pierced through the middle-aged man's forehead. Bang! The middle-aged man didn't even have the chance to speak before he was completely absorbed by the green profound sword. Xian opened his palm and the green profound sword returned to his hand. He glanced into the distance and was about to attack again when an extremely terrifying pressure suddenly assaulted him from the horizon. Xian's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked up into the sky. In the next moment, the sky split open, and a middle-aged man in a luxurious robe walked out. A praxis transformation expert. This person was the current city lord of Daoist City, Wuxia. Xian sheathed the green profound sword and silently retreated to the side. With Wuxia's appearance, the experts of Eternal Night City stopped one after another. Even though they wanted to kill the members of Daoist City, they weren't stupid. A praxis transformation expert wasn't someone they could resist. Meanwhile, the space in the sky above Zhou Xian and the others suddenly split open, and then a man in a black robe walked out. He was also a praxis transformation expert. This person was the city lord of Eternal Night City, Han Jiang. The city lords of both sides had appeared. In the distance, Wuxia's expression was extremely gloomy. Because Daoist City had actually lost 18 Daoming realm experts since the beginning. On the other hand, not a single person from Eternal Night City had died. 0 for 18. What a huge loss. Musu's gaze was sharp as a sword as he looked at Xian, who was hiding behind the crowd. Xian looked at Musu and smiled lightly. I'm sorry. I didn't hold back and killed to my heart's content, causing you to lose so many experts. I'm deeply sorry for that. As he spoke, he even bowed slightly. The expressions of the experts of Dede City instantly became ferocious when they witnessed this scene. He was trying to kill someone. Musu raised his right hand slightly and grabbed at Xian from afar. This grab caused the space where Xian stood to distort into a strange vortex, and within the vortex, Xian felt a myriad of forces tearing him apart. Fortunately, he'd released his aura and sword aura right from the beginning. Otherwise, he would have probably been shattered into countless pieces the moment Musu attacked. But even then, his aura and sword aura were gradually vanishing. Xian's brows knit together slightly and he was about to attack. However, the city governor of Eternal Night City, Han Jiang, suddenly flicked his sleeve, and then the space Xian resided in instantly returned to normal. Musu looked at Han Jiang. Han Jiang, he doesn't seem to be from Eternal Night City. Han Jiang roared with laughter. So what? All I know is that he was killing people from Dede City just now. As long as he's an enemy of Dede City, then he's a friend of Eternal Night City. Haven't you heard that the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Huh. Musu's eyes narrowed slightly, and they flickered with ghastly killing intent. Han Jiang smiled. Musu, with me here, don't even think about killing this little friend today. If you want to fight, we can fight right now. However, you have to think it through. We have this little friend here and he can kill a Daoming realm expert with 2 strikes of his sword. Xian suddenly smiled. Let me correct you, it's 1 strike of his sword. Han Jiang was slightly stunned and then he roared with laughter. Yes, it's 1 strike of his sword. I was mistaken. Huh. Han Jiang, right? Musu's expression was extremely unsightly. To fight or not to fight? Of course not. If Xian joined forces with Eternal Night City, then they were at an absolute disadvantage. Musu looked at Xian. What enmity does Dede City have with you? Xian frowned. Don't you know? Musu's eyes narrowed. Know what? Xian smiled. Let young Master Muchen tell you. Muchen. Musu hesitated for a moment and then he turned around. Meanwhile, Muchen appeared and he glanced at Xian with a complicated expression. He didn't conceal anything and told Xian everything. After knowing the ins and outs of the matter, Musu's face instantly turned extremely ugly. Muchen. He hadn't expected that this matter was caused by his eldest son. And that elder you, it was a conflict within the sect. If you have any enmity, you can look for heaven's hatred. Why should he look for Xian? An elder you's son. What kind of trash is he? Actually, he was quite annoyed at this moment. Xian wasn't an enemy of Dede City. But now Dede City had forcefully turned him into an enemy. Moreover, it was because of an idiot like Elder Yu. It wasn't worth it. Of course, there was no turning back now. Even if Dede City was willing to turn back, Xian wouldn't turn back. If Xian turned back now, then Eternal Night City would just ignore everything. Wouldn't that be a pain in the ass for Xian? Musu glanced at Xian. I never expected that another super genius would appear in this world. As he spoke, he glanced at Han Jiang. Congratulations. Han Jiang laughed heartily. This is an unexpected surprise. To Eternal Night City, this was indeed a pleasant surprise. They had already witnessed Xian's terrifying strength. Such a monstrous genius was actually forced to Eternal Night City by Dede City. Thinking of this, Han Jiang couldn't help but laugh. Musu glanced at Han Jiang and smiled. It's best to have the last laugh. Han Jiang smiled. Then let's see who will have the last laugh. Musu smiled. We'll wait and see. As he spoke, he glanced at Xian in the distance and turned to leave. The experts of Dede City also left. After Musu and the others left, Han Jiang looked at Xian. He sized up Xian and smiled. How should I address you? Xian smiled. Xian. Han Jiang was slightly stunned. Xian? Xian blinked. Senior, do you know me? Han Jiang said in a deep voice. Yes. Xian frowned. How is that possible? Han Jiang smiled faintly and did not speak. At this time Xian suddenly said, Defying one. Han Jiang nodded. After he came back he said that he met a very strong monster and that was you. At that time I didn't think much of it. I never expected that you would come here. Of course. I didn't expect that young Master Yi would be so monstrous. As expected of someone who could fight a defying one evenly. As he spoke, he glanced at the people of Eternal Night City and said angrily, "What are you waiting for? Greetings, young Master Yi." Oh no, from now on young Master Yi is the Deputy City Lord of Eternal Night City. Greetings, Deputy City Lord. Don't just stand there. Hurry up and salute. Everyone. Chapter 2053. Deputy City Lord. Everyone was slightly taken aback by Han Zhang's words. He became a Deputy City Lord just like that? They didn't think too much about it and bowed. They were all old foxes. How could they not understand Han Zhang's meaning? Of course, the young man before them was worth Han Zhang's effort. After all, Yi Xian had killed those Daoming realm experts like he was slaughtering chickens. His strength was too terrifying. Yi Xian was speechless. He had become a Deputy City Lord just like that? Han Zhang appeared before Yi Xian and said with a smile, "My Deputy City Lord, let's go. Let's go to Eternal Night City." Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment, Heaven Loath and God Eye suddenly appeared. Han Zhang frowned when he saw them. "From Daybreak City?" Yi Xian said hurriedly, "Hi friend." Han Zhang laughed. "So you're a friend of the Deputy City Lord. Then you're a friend of Eternal Night City." Deputy City Lord. Heaven Loath looked at Yi Xian. "You've become a Deputy City Lord?" Yi Xian nodded. Heaven Loath was speechless. At this time God's Eye said, "Brother Yi, after we learned that you were being pursued by Daylight City, we retreated from Daylight City now." Heaven Loath suddenly said, "Yes, Daybreak City offered us 2-star veins but we didn't accept them." God Eye's expression froze. He looked at Heaven Loath in shock. 2-star veins. Yi Xian glanced at Heaven Loath. The corners of his mouth twitched. This woman's appetite was too big. Eternal Night City probably wouldn't give them 2-star veins easily. After all, they were too precious. As expected, Han Zhang's smile faded when he heard Heaven Loath's words. Actually, he only valued Yi Xian. As for Heaven Loath and God Eye, while they were good, Yi Xian was better. If it was Yi Xian, he would be willing to give them 3 or 4-star veins, not to mention 2. After all, this was a super demon that was comparable to the defying ones. On the other hand, the expressions of the Dao Brightness Realm experts from Eternal Night City turned slightly unsightly when they heard Heaven Hateful. They were all 10,000-year-old monsters. How could they not understand White Vexation's intentions? If it was a monster like Yi Xian, Han Jiang would give him 2-star veins. After all, he was a super monster who could be compared to the defying ones. But what about Heaven's Loathing and God's Eye? If they could get 2-star veins just like that, what would they, who had been struggling in the city of Evernight for so many years, amount to? Some of the Daoming realm powerhouses had undisguised anger on their faces. Heaven Hateful's face darkened. She knew she had messed things up. She looked at Yi Xian with a trace of apology in her eyes, as well as a trace of worry. She was worried that Yi Xian would be angry and blame her for playing tricks. The surroundings suddenly fell silent, and the atmosphere became slightly awkward. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly grabbed Han Zhang's arm and smiled. "City Governor Han, these are all trivial matters. Let's talk about it later. We're all family. There's nothing we can't talk about. What do you think?" Han Jiang glanced at Yi Xian and smiled. "Indeed. Let's talk about it slowly. Let's talk about it slowly. Let's go back to Evernight City." Back to Evernight City. They returned to Evernight City. Unlike Dayday City, Evernight City was gloomy all year round and it carried an oppressive feeling. Yi Xian was actually quite curious about Dayday City and Evernight City, because his intuition told him that the two cities were definitely related. However, he didn't ask about it. Han Jiang dismissed everyone, and then he led Yi Xian's group to the city walls of Evernight City. Han Jiang smiled. "Young friend Yi, I'll get straight to the point." As he spoke, he glanced at Heavenly Hateful and Heavenly Hateful. "Both of you are at the Dao Radiance realm and you're very outstanding. I should say that you're extremely outstanding. However, I can't give you 2-star veins. At least I can't give them to you right now. Because just like Dayday City, there are certain requirements to obtain star veins. Those fellows from before have been struggling here for a very long time, and some have even struggled for over 1,000 years. However, they still haven't obtained star veins. If I were to give them to you as soon as the two of you arrive, then those fellows down below wouldn't be convinced." Heavenly Hateful nodded slightly. "What I said just now was rude. I'm sorry." Han Jiang smiled. I can understand how you feel. Because I came from the Tao Radiance realm as well. As he spoke, he gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. Young friend Yi, if you need star veins, then I can give them to you. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, let's do it according to the rules. Han Jiang heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. He could break the rules for Yi Xian, but it would make many others feel uncomfortable, and it wasn't good for the unity of Eternal Night City. Because he knew that if he gave Yi Xian star veins, then Yi Xian would definitely give them to Heavenly Hateful and God Eye. Of course, if Yi Xian used it for himself, then it would definitely not be like that. After all, Yi Xian's strength was here, so no one would go against it. Besides that, if Heavenly Hateful and God Eye obtained star veins in such a way, then they would definitely be ostracized in Eternal Night City. Yi Xian gazed at Heavenly Hateful and God Eye. Are both of you confident? God Eye hesitated for a moment and said, I'm not very confident. Yi Xian's face darkened. Heavenly Hateful suddenly said, if others can do it, then so can we. Yi Xian chuckled and then he gazed at Han Jiang. Let me make some calculations. I killed 10 Tao Radiance Realm experts just now. What other requirements do I have to fulfill in order to obtain a star vein? Han Jiang smiled. Our mission is different from Daybreak Cities. Besides killing 10 Tao Radiance Realm experts, we also have to kill a Tao Radiance Realm expert who's ranked in the top 20 of the divine rankings. Of course, that middle-aged man who led the group you killed just now was ranked in the top 20 of the divine rankings. Yi Xian smiled. In other words, I've already passed? Han Jiang smiled. There's another requirement and it's to serve Eternal Night City. Yi Xian frowned when he heard this. Meanwhile, Han Jiang suddenly smiled. Of course, young brother Yi doesn't need that. As he spoke, he opened his palm and a spatial ring descended to Yi Xian. There just happened to be a star vein within it. Yi Xian didn't refuse and immediately put it away. Thank you. As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and asked, what about the defying ones? Han Jiang looked up into the starry sky. They should be fighting Xianxia right now. Fighting? Yi Xian frowned slightly. They're fighting? Han Jiang nodded. As soon as he came back, he asked Xianxia to fight. Young brother Yi, are you interested? Yi Xian smiled. Of course. In fact, he also wanted to fight. He had reached a bottleneck and only fighting could improve him. Han Jiang smiled. Then you might have to wait. Yi Xian was a little curious. Aren't you going to keep an eye on them? Han Jiang shook his head. Both of them are arrogant and won't let us follow them. Of course, both of us aren't idle either. We're both paying attention to the top experts on both sides. Whichever expert disappears, both of us will come forward to stop it. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. Han Jiang smiled and said, before this, neither of us could do anything to the other. But now, with your participation under the power of embodiment transformation, we have the absolute advantage. Of course, I don't know if Daybreak City has any other trump cards. Yi Xian said with a smile. Forget about them. City Governor Han, I want to enter into closed-door cultivation for some time. Han Jiang nodded. All right. Let me know if you need anything. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Meanwhile, Heaven Hater spoke abruptly. I'm sorry. Yi Xian gazed at Heaven Hater. What are you sorry for? Heaven Hater glanced at Yi Xian. You know what I mean. Yi Xian chuckled. He naturally understood that Heaven Hater had played a trick and wanted to use him to obtain a star vein from Daybreak City. Needless to say, such actions were very inappropriate. Yi Xian smiled. It's nothing. As he spoke, he glanced at them and said, now both of you've joined Eternal Night City. Moreover, both of you joined Daybreak City before this. So, the people of the city more or less have different opinions about both of you. Of course, all of that is nothing. In short, remember not to cause trouble. But if someone tries to bully you on purpose, then don't hold it in. Actually, he was very clearly aware that rather than saying that Heaven Hater and Han Jiang had joined Eternal Night City, it would be more accurate to say that they were following him, Yi Xian. Han Jiang understood this as well. However, he was a smart man, so he didn't say anything about it. Heaven Hater nodded. I understand. Yi Xian continued. I can't give you the star vein. You have to fight for it. We have to rely on ourselves. Heaven Hater glanced at Yi Xian with a strange expression on his face. Yi Xian glared at Heaven Hater. What's with that look? Heaven Hater puckered his lips and didn't speak. Since she was in the wrong today, she didn't want to hurt Yi Xian's feelings. Yi Xian glanced at them. I'm going into closed-door cultivation. Both of you go familiarize yourselves with the city. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Heaven Hater remained silent for a moment before he turned around and left. Yi Xian returned to Xiao Ta and placed the star vein in Xiao Ta's body. He had to admit that with the appearance of the star vein, the spiritual qi in Xiao Ta's body became different. The spiritual qi was extremely dense. Yi Xian was a little shocked as he looked at the star aura that permeated the surroundings. No wonder so many powerhouses wanted star veins. The spirit aura of this star vein was different from other spirit auras. It was very pure. At this time Yi Xian seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly asked, Xiao Ta, why don't you look shocked when I put the star vein in? Xiao Ta said calmly, why should I be shocked? Yi Xian frowned, this is the star vein. Xiao Ta was silent for a moment. Then he said, young master, you have to understand that Little White used to live here. Yi Xian didn't understand. What do you mean? Xiao Ta sighed softly. Little White is the ancestor of all spirits. With her around, any star vein is nothing. Do you understand? Yi Xian was speechless. Xiao Ta continued, I, Xiao Ta, have seen all kinds of spiritual qi. Although this star vein is not bad, how can I be interested in it? Only someone like you who hasn't seen the world would go crazy for it. If it were me, I wouldn't even want a star vein of this level. Yi Xian's face darkened. Chapter 2054. Needless to say, Yi Xian often wanted to kill this Xiao Ta. He was too good at acting cool. Ignoring Xiao Ta, Yi Xian sat down cross-legged and slowly closed his eyes. The previous battle was delightful. When he used the green profound sword, the Daoming realm powerhouses were like ants to him, one sword for one. However, he could not underestimate the Incarnation realm powerhouses. Of course, he also wanted to fight with the Incarnation realm powerhouses. If Han Jiang had not stopped him, he would have fought with Mu Su. After a while, Yi Xian looked at the green profound sword in his hand and shook his head with a bitter smile. At this moment he could finally understand the helplessness of his big brother. Invincible, that feeling was not particularly good. Because the current him wanted someone to defeat him. Only by being defeated could he find his own shortcomings and then change them. Invincible? This feeling was not comfortable. Yi Xian got up, shook his head and sighed. Xiao Ta, to be honest, I miss the days when I was beaten up every day. Those days, although bitter, were very fulfilling and it made me want to improve. Not like now, invincible makes me lonely and empty. After a moment of silence, Xiao Ta said, young master, is it fun to act cool in front of a tower? Yi Xian laughed and turned to leave. He decided to find Han Jiang for a spar. Daoming realm? He no longer had any interest in it. Now his small goal was to kill one Incarnation realm with one sword. As soon as Yi Xian left Xiao Ta, Han Jiang appeared in front of him. Han Jiang's expression was grave. Yi Xian frowned slightly. What's wrong? Han Jiang said in a deep voice, Daoist City does not follow the rules. Yi Xian was a little surprised. What do you mean? Han Jiang's face was pale. I just received a signal from the Defying One. He is in danger. Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. Then he said, in danger? Han Jiang nodded. It must be Daoist City's doing. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, did their people make a move? Han Jiang said solemnly, we have been keeping an eye on their experts. No one has left Daybreak City. Yi Xian frowned. In other words, they have other people? Han Jiang nodded. They still have experts that we don't know about. Yi Xian continued, what about us? We should have them too, right? Han Jiang shook his head. We didn't. Yi Xian's expression froze. Han Jiang smiled bitterly. I really didn't. Moreover, I still feel that this matter is a little strange because according to what I know, there are only a total of 6 embodiment transformation realm experts in Daytime City, and those 6 are currently in Daytime City. You must know, every time an embodiment transformation realm expert appears, it is basically not enough. Breaking through from the Daoming realm to the embodiment transformation realm, that movement is too big. Yi Xian said solemnly, what else did the Defying Ones say? Han Jiang shook his head. After he sent a message asking for help, we couldn't contact him anymore. You know his personality. If it was a one-on-one battle, even if he died, he would not ask for help from us. There must be other experts in Daytime City making a move. Yi Xian thought about it and said, you want me to go? Han Jiang nodded with a gloomy expression. Right now we are all restrained by the experts of Daytime City. Anyone who leaves will be stopped. As he said, he looked at Yi Xian. Little friend Yi, you are now an extra person on our side. Only you can leave Daytime City. Moreover, Daytime City doesn't dare to stop you because we will restrain their current embodiment transformation realm experts. Yi Xian asked. Where is the Defying Ones? Han Jiang said hurriedly, the God War realm. That's an ancient battlefield. Our Evernight City and Daybreak City often fought there. Yi Xian looked at Han Jiang. Don't resist. As he said, he suddenly put his right hand on Han Jiang's shoulder and slowly closed his eyes. Think of the God War realm. Han Jiang was slightly stunned. He didn't think too much and began to think of the God War realm. A moment later, Yi Xian retracted his right hand. He opened his palm and the profound azure sword appeared in it. In an instant, he disappeared from the spot. Han Jiang was stunned. The next moment, his expression changed drastically. He found that Yi Xian had gone to the God War realm. Han Jiang was silent for a moment and said softly, this sword is good. Another day I will ask little friend Yi to make some in bulk. This way our Eternal Night City will play with Daytime City to death. Wonderful. Yi Xian appeared in the God War realm directly. As soon as he entered, he was stunned. This was because he found that this place was filled with the aura of dead spirits and the smell of blood. A normal person might dislike this aura of dead spirits and the smell of blood. However, he didn't dislike it at all. Not only did he not dislike it, but he even felt close to it. Yi Xian glanced around. This place was an abandoned continent. However, the space-time here was abnormally sturdy. The space-time density here was at least 10 times thicker than other places. This shocked Yi Xian. He had traveled through countless spacetimes, but this was the first time he had seen such a dense spacetime. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes and scanned the surroundings with his divine sense. With his current strength, his divine sense could instantly cover the entire God War realm. Soon Yi Xian frowned because he didn't find anyone. Was he not here? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian raised his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. The next moment he rode on his sword and arrived in the sky above the God War realm in the blink of an eye. Yi Xian glanced around and scanned the surroundings with his divine sense again. A moment later he frowned again. He still didn't find anyone. Yi Xian said solemnly, could this defying walker have already been killed? Saying so, he shook his head. He knew the strength of a defying walker. To kill this defying walker, it would take at least 3 unfettered embodiment realm cultivators to work together. In the same place, Yi Xian was silent for a moment. He looked at the starry sky around him and calculated in his heart. In the beginning, the defying walker and Tianqin must have fought in the God War realm because he found traces of battle below. In other words, the defying walker must have encountered something and left the God War realm. Where would the defying walker escape to? As Yi Xian pondered, he looked around. The next moment he rushed in one direction. This direction was the direction to Evernight City. In his opinion, if the defying walker really encountered an undefeatable expert and wanted to escape, it would definitely run in the direction of Evernight City. At this moment, Xiao Ta suddenly said, young master. Yi Xian said, what do you want to say? After a moment of silence, Xiao Ta said, forget it. Yi Xian frowned slightly, what the hell? Xiao Ta said, I don't want to say anything. Yi Xian was speechless. He did not talk nonsense with this Xiao Ta and increased his speed to the limit. God War realm. Not long after Yi Xian left, the place he was originally at suddenly wriggled. The next moment, a man with disheveled hair emerged from the ground. The man's clothes were shabby and his hair was disheveled. At first glance he looked like a beggar. The man looked up into the starry sky and frowned slightly, that sword's aura. Saying so, his eyes suddenly flashed with a fanatical light. Unknown expert, and a woman's aura. Interesting. Saying so, he stuck out his tongue and licked his lips, his eyes obscene. Women. Strong women are the most fun to play with. But at the end of the distant starry sky, Yi Xian flew on his sword. Soon he stopped because he found that the space in front of him was pitch black. There was a battle. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He entered the pitch black space and closed his eyes slightly. His divine consciousness directly swept out. After a while he opened his eyes and disappeared from where he was. A ray of sword light flashed in this pitch-black space. Not long after, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. At this moment he felt an extremely powerful aura. Yi Xian frowned slightly. At this moment the space-time in front of him suddenly tore open. The next moment a man rushed out. The person who rushed out was the Defying One's. It has to be said that the Defying One's appearance was a bit miserable. Not only was his body tattered and full of wounds, his right arm was missing. The most terrifying thing was that there was a pure gold arrow stuck in the Defying One's left chest. Seeing the appearance of the Defying Ones, Yi Xian was completely stunned. What happened to this guy? Why was he beaten so badly? Seeing Yi Xian, the Defying Ones was also slightly stunned. The next moment his face changed. Brother Yi, you're not here to spar with me, are you? Yi Xian was about to speak, but the Defying Ones hurriedly said, Brother Yi, now is not the time to spar. Let's spar another day, okay? Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. I'm already a member of Eternal Night City. The Defying Ones was stunned. Eternal Night City? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. We're on the same side now. But at this moment the Defying Ones suddenly grabbed Yi Xian's arm. Brother Yi, save me. Yi Xian. The Defying Ones was about to say something, but at this moment, the space behind him suddenly split open, and the next moment, a man in white walked out slowly. The man in white held a black bow in his hand, and behind him was a quiver with 6 arrows of 3 different colors. 2 were golden, 3 were black, and 1 was purple. And beside this man stood a man in a black robe and a woman in a purple dress. The man in the black robe held a sheathed long saber in his left hand, and his long hair draped over his shoulders. There was a deep saber scar between his eyebrows. As for the woman in the purple dress, she held a white spear in her right hand. She wore a veil and her eyes were crystal blue, making her look very seductive. Seeing these 3 people, Yi Xian was stunned. All 3 of them were very young, and it was obvious that they were not from White Day City. And if they were not from White Day City, where were they from? At this moment the man in white looked at Yi Xian, and the next moment his eyes fell directly on the cyan profound sword in Yi Xian's hand. When he saw the cyan profound sword he frowned slightly. In the distance the Defying Ones beside Yi Xian said in a low voice, Brother Yi, did you come alone? Yi Xian nodded. Why, is there a problem? The Defying Ones hesitated and then said, Then we can escape. After saying this he turned and disappeared into the sky. In the same place Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Chapter 2055. He fled. Yi Xian was dumbfounded by the Defying One's actions. He fled directly? Yi Xian looked at the white-clothed man in the distance, and the white-clothed man looked back at him. You're not fleeing? Yi Xian said with a smile. Fleeing? I don't know what fleeing is in my entire life. The white-clothed man nodded slightly. Just now he was just like you. He was so unyielding. As soon as he finished speaking, the man beside him suddenly charged forward and arrived in front of Yi Xian. In the next moment he suddenly drew his saber and slashed. A saber light slashed down. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he used his thumb to lightly lift his sword out of its sheath. He didn't use the green profound sword. As soon as the sword was unsheathed, an extremely terrifying aura swept out and caused the entire starry sky to seethe. However, as the saber slashed down, Yi Xian's aura and sword aura were directly slashed into pieces. Bang! The sword light shattered and Yi Xian instantly retreated 30 kilometers away. After Yi Xian stopped, he was completely dumbfounded. My opponent actually broke my aura directly? In the distance, the black-robed man suddenly held the saber in his hand with both hands. In the next moment he took a step forward and slashed down with both hands. As soon as the saber slashed down, a 30 kilometers long saber energy suddenly slashed down from the top of Yi Xian's head. The moment the saber slashed down, it carried the momentum of a thunderbolt as if it wanted to slash the entire starry sky into pieces. It was extremely terrifying. The aura contained within it was even stronger than Yi Xian's aura and sword aura. When he saw this, Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly, and there was a trace of seriousness in the depths of his eyes. Without giving it any further thought, he flicked his thumb again and a sword suddenly slashed out. After this slash, another slash flew out. However, when Yi Xian slashed out a second time, the man in the distance slashed down once more. When he saw this, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched and he slashed out again. However, the man in front of him immediately slashed out again. Just like that, both of them struck out 8 times in an instant. Boom! Suddenly, an expanse of sword light and saber light shattered in the River of Stars, and then the entire River of Stars started to be obliterated. This part of the Milky Way could not withstand the power of the two of them. As the two powerful forces erupted, Xian and the black-robed man were pushed back at the same time. Both of them were pushed back several tens of thousands of feet. When the two of them came to a stop, the starry sky for hundreds of thousands of miles around them had turned pitch black. After Xian stopped, there was a trace of seriousness in his eyes, but there was more excitement. Battles could excite him. At this moment, the black-robed man slowly raised the long saber in his right hand. Boom! A black vortex suddenly appeared in the sky above the black-robed man. In the next moment, a bolt of divine lightning suddenly descended from the vortex and entered his saber. Rumble! The long saber shook violently. In an instant, the long saber was covered by the divine lightning and turned into a thunder saber. In the distance, Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. He stared at the hilt of his sword with his left thumb, and then he slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, the surroundings had suddenly fallen silent, and it was like he was the only person in the world. Calm his heart. The sword in Xian's hand suddenly started trembling slightly, and then it emanated a sword howl. The white-clothed man who led the group in the distance frowned slightly when he witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, Xian suddenly opened his eyes and then he raised his thumb lightly. A sword cry suddenly soared into the sky. At the same time, a sword came out of the pitch-black darkness. At the same time, a sword flashed through the pitch-black starry sky. The eyes of the black-robed man who stood in front of Xian narrowed slightly, and then he raised his saber with both hands and swung it down. A strand of saber chi that carried lightning suddenly slashed down from above the black-robed man's head. It was a collision between sword and saber. Bang! The lightning saber chi slashed directly onto Xian's sword. In an instant, the sword was enveloped by an expanse of lightning. But in the next moment, the lightning was torn apart, and then a sword shot straight towards the black-robed man. A trace of shock flashed through the depths of the black-robed man's eyes, and then he raised his saber to block it. Bang! The black-robed man was blasted 30 kilometers away. He just stopped when another flying sword slashed down towards him. A wisp of viciousness flashed through the black-robed man's eyes, and then he suddenly swung his right hand and slashed down with his saber. Bang! An expanse of light erupted in front of him, and then he retreated explosively once more. At practically the exact same moment, another sword slashed down towards him. The black-robed man's eyes narrowed slightly while the corners of his eyes twitched slightly. He held his saber vertically in front of him with both hands. Bang! The saber shook violently, and the powerful force it carried blasted the black-robed man back once more. However, this wasn't the end of it because another flying sword slashed down towards him. The speed of this flying sword was infuriatingly swift. The black-robed man was utterly unable to attack with his saber, and he could only defend passively. Even if he did attack with his saber, he could only do it in a simple manner, and he didn't have the time to utilize any formidable saber techniques. At the instant when they collided just now, he'd fallen into a slight disadvantage, and it was precisely this disadvantage that allowed Xian to seize the opportunity to force him into a hopeless situation. The slightest carelessness would doom him eternally. In a short period of time, the black-robed man had retreated over 30 kilometers. Moreover, there were a few tens of scars from the sword on his body, and his entire body was dyed red with blood. However, he didn't dare slack off in the slightest because Xian's sword was truly too swift, and the slightest bit of carelessness would cause it to pierce through his head. Just like that, the black-robed man retreated over and over again. At this moment, cracks had appeared on the saber in his hand. On the other side, the white-robed man and woman in a violet dress didn't show any signs of attacking, and they just watched with calm expressions. However, both of them frequently glanced at the green profound sword that hung on the right side of Xian's waist. Right at this moment, the saber in the black-robed man's hand suddenly shattered into pieces. In practically an instant, a sword had instantly arrived between his brows. Right at this moment of life and death, the black-robed man's eyes slowly closed, and then a saber suddenly flew out from between his brows. Bang! At the instant the saber appeared, Xian's sword shattered into pieces. Xian frowned slightly when he witnessed this scene. Because that saber hadn't just destroyed the black-robed man's sword, It had even destroyed the other 3 swords behind the black-robed man's sword. Yi Xian gazed at the saber. It was thin like a cicada's wing, and it seemed to be translucent at first glance. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. What saber is that? Looks very formidable. The black-robed man stared fixedly at Yi Xian from afar. You're very strong. You forced me to use my heart saber. Yi Xian was slightly curious. What's a heart saber? The black-robed man frowned slightly. You haven't condensed a heart sword? Yi Xian shook his head. Nope. A trace of disbelief flashed in the black-robed man's eyes. With your strength, how is it possible that you haven't condensed a heart sword? Yi Xian smiled. Can you tell me what a heart saber is? The black-robed man glanced at Yi Xian. A heart saber is a saber that is condensed from one's thoughts. It's also the most suitable saber for oneself because it's a sword that is condensed from one's thoughts. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. One's thoughts can also be condensed into a saber? The black-robed man frowned again. Don't you know? Yi Xian smiled. I don't have a heart sword. However, I have a sister sword. The black-robed man looked at Yi Xian. What sister sword? Yi Xian waved the green profound sword at his waist. My younger sister forged this sword for me. It's called sister sword for short. The black-robed man glanced at Yi Xian's green profound sword and he said in a deep voice, This sword of yours is very extraordinary. However, it's not a heart sword in the end. Meanwhile, the white-robed man spoke abruptly. Hei Yan, don't underestimate this sword. A trace of surprise flashed in the black-robed man's eyes when he heard the white-robed man, and then he looked at the green profound sword in Yi Xian's hand. This time his gaze carried curiosity. In the distance, Yi Xian said with a smile, Again. As he spoke, he suddenly charged forward and directly appeared in front of the black-robed man. A wisp of viciousness flashed through the black-robed man's eyes. He issued a command in his heart, and then the heart blade in front of him suddenly flew up and slashed down. Bang! This slash caused Yi Xian's sword to be directly slashed into pieces. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Draw to decide life and death. A divine close combat technique. As soon as Yi Xian drew his sword, over 10,000 overlapped in an instant. After all, his current strength was different from before. Regardless of whether it was his strength or soul, they couldn't be compared to the past. Rumble. As soon as Yi Xian slashed down with his sword, he and the black-robed man Hei Yan instantly retreated explosively for over 30 kilometers. At the instant that Yi Xian retreated, a flying sword suddenly slashed towards Hei Yan. Hei Yan didn't attack, but the heart saber in front of him suddenly swept out. Bang! The flying sword was slashed into pieces. But right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of Hei Yan. This time he didn't utilize a flying sword and he directly utilized the core sword domain. In an instant, an expanse of sword light drowned Hei Yan, and countless rays of sword light tore and slashed apart. In the distance, the white-robed man in the lead frowned slightly. However, he still didn't attack. Right at this moment, Yi Xian's sword light suddenly exploded. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had already retreated over 3 kilometers. However, as he retreated, numerous flying swords connected from head to tail and slashed towards Hei Yan in the distance. 7 consecutive swords. In the distance, Hei Yan, who was covered in injuries, suddenly roared furiously. In the next moment he held the heart saber with both hands as he charged forward and slashed forward. Remove the absurd. As soon as he spoke, a black dot suddenly appeared on the tip of the heart saber. This black dot seemed like black blood and it was strange and ghastly. As soon as this black dot appeared, the heart saber suddenly trembled violently. In the next moment, an extremely terrifying force swept out from the tip of the heart saber. Bang! The first sword shattered and then the second. In the blink of an eye, the 7 swords were directly shattered by the saber. Not only that, but Yi Xian was directly pushed back tens of thousands of feet by the saber, and in front of him in the black flame was a huge space-time abyss that was thousands of feet wide. This spatial abyss was 300 m wide and 30 kilometers long. This was the result of Hei Yan's forceful slash. Moreover, a powerful force was ceaselessly shattering space within this spatial abyss. In the distance, Hei Yan held the heart saber in his right hand while the blood within his body boiled madly. At this moment, the blood that flowed out of his body was actually black. In the distance, Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth and then he said, "The power of bloodline?" He Yan held the heart saber in his hand as he walked slowly towards Yi Xian. The bloodline of the fire god. Swordsman, you should be honored to die before the power of bloodline. P.S. Everyone, are you done playing daddy for today? If you are, get it? Chapter 2056. Infernal God Bloodline. It has to be said that after He Yan displayed the power of his bloodline, his strength had multiplied in a short period of time. Not only that, there was also a faint black flame around He Yan. The flame was like black blood, emitting an extremely terrifying power. The space around him was constantly being burned by the flame. It was extremely terrifying. At this moment, He Yan's blade was supported by the power of his bloodline. Yi Xian could no longer block it. From afar, Yi Xian looked at He Yan and sighed. Seeing Yi Xian sigh, He Yan stopped and frowned. Swordsman, why are you sighing? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. I just want to have a fair fight with you. He Yan stared at Yi Xian and was a little confused. Swordsman, aren't we having a fair fight? My brothers didn't help me. Yi Xian smiled. That's not what I meant. He Yan looked at the Qingxian sword in Yi Xian's hand and said, I know that your sword is not ordinary. You can use it. Yi Xian looked at the Qingxian sword on his waist and shook his head. Not really. Finishing his words, he slowly walked towards He Yan. He Yan squinted his eyes and was a little more cautious. He had never underestimated Yi Xian, the swordsman. One had to know that he had always been suppressed by Yi Xian before he used the power of his bloodline. Who knew if Yi Xian had a trump card? He Yan was secretly cautious. At the same time, the blade in his hand trembled slightly. A powerful force gathered in the blade and was ready to be unleashed. At this moment, Yi Xian's eyes gradually turned blood red. The next moment, he gently pushed with his left thumb. Zhoosh! A blood-red sword light flashed across the field. The power of his bloodline. Yi Xian was not pedantic. Others had already used their bloodline power, so of course he would use it. His principle was that if you don't use external objects, I won't use external objects. If you don't use your father, I won't use my father. The moment the sword light appeared, the man in white and the woman in purple frowned at the same time. Opposite Yi Xian, He Yan's pupils abruptly shrunk. At this moment he could feel the aura of death. Moreover, as the blood sword approached, the aura of death grew increasingly dense. It had been a long time since he had felt the scent of death so close to his heart. He Yan did not choose to retreat, nor could he retreat. Because once he retreated, he would be crazily suppressed by Yi Xian's flying sword, and he would be in a passive position again. He Yan's right hand gripped the heart saber tightly. In an instant, his heart saber turned blood black. In the next moment, he held the saber with both hands and slashed forward. Breaking absurd. The saber fell. Boom. A saber light and a blood-red sword light suddenly exploded. The starry sky boiled. He Yan retreated tens of thousands of feet. The moment he stopped, his pupils abruptly shrunk. Because another sword was slashing towards him. He Yan forcefully swallowed the blood that had surged up his throat. Then he used his trembling hands to slash forward with the heart saber. Boom. The moment the saber fell, He Yan retreated tens of thousands of feet again. When he stopped, another sword slashed towards him. He Yan's pupils instantly shrunk to the size of a needle. He was about to attack, but he was shocked to find that the heart saber in his hands had shattered. It's over. At this moment, that was the only thought left in He Yan's mind. At this moment, when Yi Xian's sword was half an inch away from He Yan's forehead, it suddenly shattered and turned into nothingness. What replaced it was an arrow. The man in white had attacked. In the distance, Yi Xian turned to look at the man in white. The man in white had a calm expression. The competition is over. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly took out a golden arrow. In the next moment, he drew his bow and released the arrow. In the distance, Yi Xian gently lifted his thumb. The sword was unsheathed. Boom. A wave of sword light shattered, and Yi Xian's sword was directly shattered. In the next moment, the arrow was already in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He tilted his body slightly and easily dodged the arrow because it wasn't very fast. However, in the next moment, his pupils suddenly constricted because he realized that the arrow had appeared in front of him again. A strange arrow. Yi Xian reacted quickly and lightly lifted his thumb. The sword in the scabbard suddenly flew out and pierced the arrow. Boom. The golden arrow was directly blasted away. At this moment, another arrow arrived. Not only that, but a spear suddenly appeared behind Yi Xian's head. The appearance of this spear was truly strange. It only appeared a few inches behind Yi Xian's head before Yi Xian could sense this spear. An arrow and a spear. The woman in purple had attacked as well. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression instantly became extremely solemn. A hopeless situation. At this moment he was directly in a hopeless situation. Because between the arrow and the spear he could only choose to defend. And he knew that behind that arrow there was another arrow. His current situation was similar to He Yan's. In the end Yi Xian chose to defend against that arrow. He had no other choice. The sword was unsheathed. Boom. The golden arrow was directly blocked by his sword. However, Yi Xian was stunned because he realized that the spear hadn't pierced the back of his head. A mysterious force had blocked the spear. At this moment, a man appeared 300 meters behind Yi Xian. It was the Defying Ones. At this moment his right arm had recovered, and the injuries on his body had mostly healed. The Defying Ones raised his right hand and the tip of the spear turned in a strange way. In the next moment, it directly appeared in front of the woman in purple. The power of the Defying Ones. In the distance, the woman in purple's expression was calm. She raised her right hand lightly and then clenched it lightly. This time the terrifying spear directly fell into her hand. Boom. The space around the woman in purple was directly annihilated at this moment, but she didn't retreat at all. Her expression was still calm. She had withstood the Defying One's power, but the space around her couldn't. The Defying Ones glanced at the woman in purple and then appeared beside Yi Xian. "Brother Yi, are you all right?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "These three fellows don't care about martial ethics. They actually ganged up on me." The Defying Ones said indifferently, "Not only did they ganged up on me but they also launched a sneak attack on me. They are even more shameless than you." Yi Xian turned to look at the Defying Ones, his face full of shock. "Are you targeting them? Why do I feel that you are targeting me?" The Defying Ones said seriously, "You are shameless but you have a bottom line. They are shameless without a bottom line. There is still a difference." Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. The Defying Ones still wanted to say something, but Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Stop, let's not discuss this topic anymore." The Defying Ones. Yi Xian looked at the man in white and the other two in the distance. "Who are they?" The Defying Ones shook his head. "I don't know." Yi Xian frowned. "You don't know?" The Defying Ones nodded. "I don't know where they came from. In any case, when I was fighting with Tianchen, these three fellows suddenly appeared and launched a sneak attack on me. If I hadn't run away quickly, I would have been dead." Yi Xian looked at the man in white and smiled. "You guys were recruited by Daybreak City." The man in white nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian frowned. "You guys are from Daybreak City?" The man in white shook his head. "No, we just took someone's money, so we are helping them out." Hearing this, Yi Xian and the Defying Ones understood. Damn. These three people were hired by Daybreak City. Yi Xian glanced at the Defying Ones. "Looks like Daybreak City is up to something big." The Defying Ones spoke in a low voice. "We have to go back." Yi Xian looked at the man in white and the other two. "Will they let us go?" The Defying Ones hesitated for a moment and then he said, "Brother Yi, I know you're very good at fighting. Why don't you stop them while I go back first? I'll bring some people over to save you once I return." Yi Xian smiled. "You'll bring some people over to collect my corpse after you return, right?" The Defying One's expression froze when he heard this. Yi Xian shook his head. Even though he was confident, it was absolutely impossible for him to fight three people at once, even if he used the green profound sword and his bloodline energy. The man in white's strength was absolutely not inferior to him, the Defying Ones and the woman in a violet dress. They were extremely strong, but He Yan wasn't weak either. Not to mention 1 against 3, even 2 against 3 would be quite difficult for them. In the distance, the man in white glanced at Yi Xian. "Our target is him. We won't stop you if you leave." Yi Xian asked hurriedly, "Really?" Fuck. The Defying Ones looked at Yi Xian. "Brother Yi, don't scare me." If Yi Xian left, then he would be beaten up and he had already been beaten up just now. In the distance, the man in white nodded. "Really?" Yi Xian was slightly hesitant. The Defying One's expression changed drastically. "Brother Yi, tell me that you're not that kind of person." Yi Xian looked at the Defying Ones. Look, you're their target, so it's really inexcusable for me to stay." The Defying Ones hurriedly said, What inexcusable? We're on the same side. We're brothers from the same sect and blood is thicker than water. Yi Xian said seriously, you shot my star vein in the past. Have you forgotten? The Defying Ones was stunned and then he said, Brother Yi, that doesn't seem to be yours, right? I remember it's the Imperial God. Saying this, he suddenly took out a storage ring and put it in front of Yi Xian, who was about to leave, and then said, Brother Yi, it was a misunderstanding. I have no use for this star vein. You keep it. Yi Xian took the storage ring and then he flew into a rage. What are you doing? The Defying Ones was stunned. Yi Xian said angrily, we're all from Eternal Night City. We should be in the same boat, but you gave me this thing. You're insulting me, don't you know that? The Defying One's expression froze. Yi Xian said bitterly, we're brothers from the same sect and blood is thicker than water. You actually used the star vein to measure our friendship. What kind of person do you think I, Yi Xian, am? I look down on you. The Defying Ones looked at Yi Xian dumbfounded. Brother, are you on the same side as them, Yi Xian? Chapter 2057. The man in white said abruptly, it seems like you intend to interfere in this matter. Yi Xian looked at the man in white and smiled. This is my brother from the same sect, yet you're asking me to leave him alone? That won't do unless you pay me more. The Defying One's expression froze when he heard Yi Xian, and he tugged on Yi Xian's sleeve. Brother Yi, don't be like this. I'm panicking. He really was panicking. If Yi Xian didn't do anything, he would definitely die. He couldn't fight the three of them on his own. The man in white gazed at Yi Xian and he said after a short while, it's impossible to pay more. However, I can bury all of you together later. As soon as he finished speaking, the bow was drawn and the arrow was released. Everywhere the arrow passed, space and time started burning, and then it was swiftly obliterated. In the distance, Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly, and there was a trace of a solemn expression in his eyes. He raised his left thumb and the sword in the sheath flew out. At this moment he'd utilized the power of his bloodline, so this attack didn't just contain sword aura and sword aura, it also contained the power of his bloodline. Everywhere the blood-red sword passed, space and time were obliterated into nothingness. Bang! The golden feathered arrow was stopped by this strike. At this moment, a spear pierced straight down from the top of Yi Xian's head. When the spear was only a dozen inches away from Yi Xian's head, a mysterious force suddenly enveloped the spear. In the next moment, the spear vanished on the spot, and when it reappeared, it was already above the head of the woman in the purple dress in the distance. Not only that, the force contained within it was many times stronger than before. The purple-robed woman frowned slightly. She opened her palm and gently pushed upwards. In an instant, an invisible force blocked the spear. However, the deceived space-time above her head caved in like the bottom of a pot. It was extremely terrifying. Meanwhile, the Defying One suddenly pressed his right hand down. Bang! The spear above the woman in a purple dress suddenly trembled violently, and a powerful force passed through it and smashed down. Rumble! The space where the woman resided had transformed into a strange vortex. However, right at this moment she waved her right hand lightly, and then a violet barrier of light enveloped her. She was safe and sound within the violet barrier of light. Not only that, but the powerful retrograde force actually dissipated little by little when it came into contact with the purple light barrier. Seeing this, the Defying Ones in the distance frowned slightly and slowly clenched their right hands. Right at this moment, the woman in the purple dress made a grabbing motion with her right hand, and this grab directly grabbed onto the spear. In the next moment she vanished on the spot. In practically an instant, the space in front of the defying adversary was suddenly torn apart. A spear tore through the air, and then it pierced towards the space between the defying adversary's eyebrows at lightning speed. The defying walker's expression was calm. He clenched his right hand tightly into a fist and then he suddenly punched forward. A strand of formidable defying energy swept out from his fist, and in an instant he and the woman in a purple dress had actually switched places. Reverse spacetime. Boom. The expansive space in front of the woman in a purple dress had been pierced into an enormous spatial black hole. Meanwhile, she suddenly turned around and stabbed her spear forward again. However, the defying walker had switched places with her once more. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't turn around and she just stabbed her spear forward instead. Bang! An expanse of violet light suddenly erupted from the tip of the spear. Rumble. In an instant, the entire starry sky seethed while countless strands of starlight were obliterated. Meanwhile, the defying walker had transformed into countless afterimages that retreated backwards. He turned into countless afterimages as he retreated. When he stopped, the countless afterimages returned to his body, and the woman in the purple dress had already retreated 100,000 feet. She gazed at the defying walker in the distance and then she vanished on the spot. The defying walker took a step forward and he vanished as well. In an instant, countless afterimages appeared in that expanse of space. Xian withdrew his gaze and gazed at the white-clothed man in front of him. If it was a one-on-one battle, then the defying walker wouldn't lose to the woman in a purple dress at all. Of course he wouldn't lose to the white-clothed man as well. However, the problem was that it wasn't a fair competition. It was a 3 against 2. That was disadvantageous to him and the defying walker. In the distance, the white-clothed man suddenly took out a black feathered arrow. But right at this moment Xian suddenly flicked his thumb and a flying sword slashed out. Of course he wouldn't just stand there and wait for his opponent to attack. What was the biggest disadvantage of an archer? They were afraid of getting close to him. He wanted to strike first and gain the upper hand. However, his sword pierced through thin air. Because when the green profound sword slashed towards the white-clothed man took a small step to the left, and it was this small step that caused Xian's sword to miss. Not only that, but a black feathered arrow had already arrived in front of Xian. Xian lightly flicked his left thumb. Bang! A wave of sword light suddenly erupted in front of him, and Xian instantly retreated a few kilometers away. But he hadn't even stopped when that black feathered arrow came again. It was still that black feathered arrow. Xian's eyes narrowed slightly and then he slowly closed his eyes. At this moment the heavens and the earth suddenly fell silent. His heart was calm. He'd entered such a state when he fought He Yan earlier, and the might of his sword when he attacked in such a state was much stronger. Everything was clear when the heart was calm. Even though his eyes were closed, he was able to clearly sense everything about the arrow, and it even included the trembling of the feathers at the end of the arrow. Suddenly Xian lightly flicked his thumb. A clear and melodious sword howl suddenly resounded. In the next moment, a ray of light slashed against the arrow. Bang! The arrow was forcefully stopped, but it didn't move back. But this time Xian's sword didn't move back as well. The sword and arrow were in a stalemate, but the space around them was gradually being obliterated. The force of the sword and arrow had stopped. However, the space in the surroundings wasn't able to endure it. Right at this moment, the white-clothed man took out another black-feathered arrow, and then a sharp tearing sound resounded. In the distance, Xian's expression was calm, and his thumb was on the hilt of his sword. When the arrow was a few meters away from him, he lightly flicked his thumb and the sword in the sheath flew out. This sword was different from before. When it left the sheath, it was very calm and it carried a sense of ease. This sword slashed against the arrow, and the arrow trembled violently before it was blasted 3 kilometers away. The white-clothed man frowned slightly when he saw this, and there was a trace of seriousness in the depths of his eyes as he looked at Xian. Change. Since the beginning of the battle, Xian's sword had been slowly changing, and it was a sign of a breakthrough. When he thought of this, the white-clothed man turned to look at He Yan. Are we here to make friends with them? He Yan was stunned and then he shook his head. Of course not. The white-clothed man said, since you're not, then why aren't you attacking? He Yan's expression froze. He hesitated for a while and then raised his hand. He raised his long saber and charged towards Xian. In the distance, Xian frowned slightly. He was not afraid of He Yan. However, when He Yan charged towards him, another black arrow shot towards him. This arrow was different from the previous one. Everything in its path became illusory. He Yan. Arrows. Off in the distance, Xian frowned slightly. At this moment he was a bit irritated, or perhaps it could be said that he was a bit anxious. Anxious would make him irritated, and irritated would make him unable to calm his heart. Very quickly Xian felt that his state of mind had changed. He was shocked. If he became agitated at this moment, it would be very dangerous. The man in white and He Yan were not ordinary people. At this time it was already too late for him to change his state of mind. He gently pushed with his thumb. The sword was unsheathed. However, the power of this sword was much weaker than the previous one. When this sword touched the arrow, it was instantly destroyed. The arrow continued forward, piercing towards Yi Xian. At the same time, He Yan's saber was already above Yi Xian's head. Yi Xian suddenly unsheathed his sword and slashed. This was because He Yan was already in front of him. This was a close combat. If the flying sword could not directly destroy the opponent's power, then he would be the one at a disadvantage. Unsheathing the sword to determine life and death. As soon as the sword was unsheathed, a ray of sword light suddenly exploded in front of him. In an instant, the ray of sword light engulfed both of them. In the next moment, both of them retreated at the same time. Yi Xian retreated tens of thousands of feet. Not only that, there was a black arrow stuck in his left chest. The black arrow trembled slightly, crazily destroying the vitality in Yi Xian's body. However, at this crucial moment, the power of the bloodline in Yi Xian's body suddenly surged. Then the power of the bloodline crazily resisted the power of the black arrow. Yi Xian was stunned. He did not expect his bloodline to have such a function. Without much thought, Yi Xian was about to pull the arrow out, but he was shocked to find that he could not pull it out at all. Yi Xian tried to use his aura and sword force to force it out, but it did not work. Just like that, the power of his bloodline and the power of the arrow crazily fought against each other in his body. In the distance, the man in white suddenly took out another black arrow. He looked at Yi Xian. I know that the sword in your hand is not simple. Are you really not going to use it? Obviously, he was referring to the green profound sword. Yi Xian looked at the man in white and said disdainfully, I don't care about external objects. The man in white looked at Yi Xian and nodded, You've got guts. As he spoke, he shot another arrow. Almost at the same time, He Yan appeared in front of Yi Xian again. He was faster than the arrow. Obviously, this was intentional. He was covering for the man in white's arrow. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly pulled out his sword and slashed. This time he did not use an ordinary sword but the green profound sword. This sword slashed out. Boom. A ray of light shattered and He Yan was directly sent flying. This time he flew for tens of thousands of feet. When he stopped, his body was gone. Not only that, the arrow was directly shattered by Yi Xian's sword. In the distance, the man in white squinted his eyes. Behind him, the purple arrow in the quiver suddenly trembled. On the other side, He Yan looked at Yi Xian and said blankly, Didn't you say you don't need it? Yi Xian looked at He Yan and said seriously, I lied to you. Are you angry? He Yan's expression froze. P.S. Asking for tickets. I exploded yesterday. Chapter 2058. Was he angry? He Yan glared at Yi Xian. He was obviously angry. Damn it. He said he would not use the sword, but he suddenly used it. He was caught off guard. In fact, he really thought that Yi Xian would not use the sword. After all, Yi Xian was a swordsman. How could he play such a dirty trick? However, he did not expect that this swordsman did not play by the rules. He was too careless. At this moment, Yi Xian's lips curled up. Then he raised his thumb. The green profound sword flew across the battlefield. He Yan's pupils shrank. He was shocked because Yi Xian's sword was aimed at him. He was a spirit now. How could he block this sword? At this moment, a purple arrow suddenly flew across the battlefield. The next moment, the purple arrow hit Yi Xian's green profound sword. It was a tit for tat. Boom. The green profound sword was forced to a stop. However, the next moment the purple arrow was shattered. However, He Yan had already retreated tens of thousands of feet away. There was a huge distance between him and Yi Xian. Yi Xian's flying sword was terrifying. However, as long as he was further away, it would be less of a threat. From afar, the man in white glanced at the green profound sword in Yi Xian's hand and said softly, It can actually break my Zisu. Good sword. Yi Xian glanced at the retrogressors and the lady in the purple dress in the distance. At this moment, the two of them were fighting back and forth. They were equally matched. Yi Xian retracted his gaze and looked at the man in white. Again. As soon as he finished speaking, he was just about to swing his sword. However, right at this moment, an unexpected event occurred. A ray of cold light had suddenly appeared at his throat. Yi Xian's hair stood on end. Damn it, there's still an assassin. Yi Xian was horrified. At this moment, it was already too late for him to draw his sword. He could only dodge. His reaction was also extremely fast. In the instant that the cold light appeared, he directly retreated thousands of feet away. However, it was too late. A stream of blood spurted out from Yi Xian's throat. At the same time his body began to rot rapidly. At this time Xiao Ta suddenly said, "Young master, there are assassins." Yi Xian's face darkened. "Why aren't you waiting for me to die?" Xiao Ta felt a little wronged. "I just realized it." Yi Xian was speechless. Right at this moment, the Defying One suddenly appeared by Yi Xian's side. He glanced at the surroundings and said, "Brother Yi, has that assassin attacked?" Yi Xian looked at the Defying Ones. "You know there are assassins?" The Defying One nodded. "That's right. My arm was cut off by him." "What, you don't know?" Yi Xian was furious. "You're also a scammer." The retrogressors. Meanwhile, the wound on Yi Xian's throat had healed completely. Although the saber had slit his throat and it was corrosive, he possessed the undying bloodline. So long as he wasn't killed, it would be very difficult for him to die. When he saw Yi Xian's injury recovering at a visible speed, the white-clothed man frowned. He hadn't expected that Yi Xian would be able to survive after being stabbed. After all, that saber had slit Yi Xian's throat. Moreover, it was extremely corrosive. This is a little troublesome. The white-clothed man's face sank. In the distance, the Defying One suddenly said, "Brother Yi, what should we do now?" "What should we do?" Yi Xian looked at the white-clothed man. Although he'd utilized the green profound sword, he still wasn't confident in his ability to kill the three of them and the assassin that was hiding in the dark. Because his intuition told him that the woman and the white-clothed man still had trump cards. The Defying One said in a low voice, "Brother Yi, why don't we flee?" Yi Xian said, "You'll cover our retreat?" The Defying One's face froze. Meanwhile, the white-clothed man suddenly opened his palm and an arrow appeared there. This arrow was dark gold in color, but the tip of the arrow was blood red. Yi Xian glanced at the arrow and then he suddenly vanished on the spot. At the instant he vanished, the green profound sword suddenly pierced through the center of the white-clothed man's forehead. "He's dead?" "No." This sword strike had merely pierced through an afterimage. The white-clothed man's body was already 3 kilometers away. Yi Xian's face fell when he witnessed this scene. This fellow's speed had slightly exceeded his expectations. The white-clothed man suddenly drew his bow, and then an arrow tore through the surroundings. Bang! This arrow was like a torrent that swept through the starry sky. In an instant, wherever the arrow passed, an abyssal gorge that was almost 3,000 meters wide appeared in the starry sky. The Defying One's brows instantly knit together when he saw this arrow. He was just about to attack when a formidable strand of divine sense locked onto him. It was the woman in a violet dress. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and slashed down with his sword. Bang! A strand of dazzling cold light suddenly erupted in front of him, and then an afterimage retreated explosively for over 30 kilometers. It was that assassin. Yi Xian glanced coldly at that assassin, and then he suddenly turned around, sheathed the green profound sword and raised it lightly with his thumb. Boom! Following a sword cry, the profound azure sword flew out at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, it had slashed the arrow. Bang! The arrow was forcefully stopped by the green profound sword. After a moment of silence, the green profound sword actually tore the arrow apart, and then the arrow continued forward and slashed towards the white-clothed man in the distance. The expansive space where the white-clothed man resided was instantly torn apart by the green profound sword, but the white-clothed man had already retreated 3 kilometers away. Yi Xian's face sank when he witnessed this scene. The white-clothed man's speed had surpassed the speed of his flying sword. Under such circumstances, it was very difficult for him to approach the white-clothed man, and it was even more difficult for him to kill the white-clothed man. Such speed was practically undefeatable. As if he'd thought of something, the Defiant suddenly said, "Brother Yi, let's change our opponent." As he spoke, he gazed at the white-clothed man and said, "I'll keep him busy." Yi Xian gazed at the woman in a violet dress and said, "All right." He understood what the Defiant meant. Even though the Defiant couldn't kill the white-clothed man, he could keep the white-clothed man busy. Moreover, if he were to go against the woman in a violet dress, then coupled with his green profound sword, he had a very good chance of killing her. The woman didn't possess the white-clothed man's speed, and once someone chose to go head-on against him, Yi Xian, then that person would basically lose without a doubt. Unless that person possessed an existence that could go against the green profound sword. Right at this moment, the Defiant suddenly vanished on the spot, and his target was the white-clothed man. On the other hand, Yi Xian had vanished on the spot at practically the exact same moment, and his target was the woman in a violet dress. The woman in a violet dress frowned slightly. She didn't retreat. Of course she couldn't retreat, nor did she choose to go head-on against Yi Xian. Because she'd witnessed how terrifying the green profound sword was, and she couldn't resist it at all. She slowly closed her eyes, and then a violet barrier of light instantly appeared around her. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword arrived before her. Bang! The violet barrier of light shook violently and then countless cracks appeared on it. At the same time, the woman in a violet dress was blasted 30 kilometers away by Yi Xian's attack, and a flying sword suddenly slashed towards her when she stopped moving. It was the green profound sword. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, and then she suddenly pressed her hands down. As soon as she did, another violet barrier of light appeared around her. The sword arrived before her. Rumble. This time, the violet barrier of light shattered into pieces, and the powerful force of the collision blasted the woman over 30 kilometers away. However, she hadn't even stopped moving when Yi Xian's sword slashed down once more. Her pupils constricted. If she couldn't resist this attack, then her soul would definitely be obliterated. Right at this critical moment, a cold ray of light suddenly appeared in front of her. The assassin had attacked. The cold ray of light slashed directly onto Yi Xian's green profound sword. Bang! The cold ray of light shattered and the sound of a dagger breaking resounded. At the same time, the woman in a violet dress was blasted over 30 kilometers away. When she finally stopped moving, her body had split apart, but it didn't shatter into pieces. However, fresh blood sprayed and she was instantly covered in blood. The woman's expression became extremely solemn. Damn it. This fellow simply seems like a completely different person after he changed his sword. What the hell? The white-clothed man who was being restrained by the defiance frowned slightly. Actually, the strength of Yi Xian's sword had greatly exceeded his expectations. He'd noticed the green profound sword as soon as he saw Yi Xian, and he'd sensed how extraordinary the green profound sword was. So he'd been constantly on guard against the green profound sword. However, he hadn't expected that Yi Xian's strength would simply seem like a completely different person after he utilized the green profound sword. It was too abnormal. Yi Xian glanced at the woman whose body had cracked apart, and he was just about to attack. However, right at this moment, an afterimage suddenly appeared behind him. It was that assassin again. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and slashed down with his sword as if he knew where the assassin was. Bang! As soon as his sword descended, the space before him shattered into pieces. At the same time, a black shadow was slashed into a spatial abyss by Yi Xian's sword, and when Yi Xian was about to follow up with another attack, the assassin had vanished without a trace. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. The assassin had moved far away from him. The reason he was able to notice the assassin was actually because of Xiao Ta. But now, Xiao Ta couldn't sense the assassin's existence any longer. So, the assassin was very far away from him. However, so long as the assassin was within 3 kilometers of him, then Xiao Ta would be able to notice the assassin. Of course, he didn't dare to place all his hopes on Xiao Ta. After all, Xiao Ta was even more terrifying than his enemies when he wasn't reliable. The assassin hadn't approached him, so Yi Xian simply paid no attention to him. He turned around to gaze at the woman in a violet dress, and then the green profound sword suddenly returned to its sheath in his left hand. Right at this moment, space in the distance was suddenly torn apart and then a man walked out from within it. Yi Xian frowned when he saw the man, and then he gazed at the defiant who had a slightly unsightly expression on his face. You know him? The defiant nodded. He's Tianqin. Yi Xian's face instantly darkened when he heard this. Another extraordinarily monstrous genius has arrived? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Big brother, do you have any friends? The defiant hesitated for a moment before he said, I do. Yi Xian hurriedly said, quickly call for help. The defiant said, he's here. Yi Xian was stunned and then he glanced at the surroundings. Where? The defiant gazed at Yi Xian. It's you. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 2059. Me. Yi Xian's face darkened and he was extremely speechless. Damn it. This defiant is such a scam. The defiant glanced at Tianqin and said, Brother Yi, what should we do now? Even though both of them were extraordinary geniuses, their opponents weren't weak either. Moreover, Xianxia had joined the battle as well. How should we fight them? The Defiant was troubled as well. Right at this moment, Xianxia suddenly gazed at the white-clothed man. Who are all of you? Xian and the Defiant were stunned. This fellow doesn't know these fellows? The white-clothed man glanced at Xianxia but didn't speak. Xianxia fell silent for a moment before he gazed at the Defiant. Let's go. Go. The Defiant hesitated for a moment and said, Xianxia, you wouldn't be playing any tricks, right? Xianxia gazed at the Defiant. I didn't know that Daybreak City had asked them to come here. I know nothing about this. The Defiant glanced at Xianxia. I believe you. Because Xianxia hadn't attacked when he'd been ambushed just now. If Xianxia had attacked, then he might not have been able to escape. Meanwhile, the white-clothed man gazed at Xianxia. Do you know what you're doing? Xianxia gazed at the white-clothed man and spoke with disdain. How could I not know what I'm doing? Do I need you to remind me? The white-clothed man frowned slightly. Your Daybreak City spent 6-star veins to hire us to kill him, yet you've come to help him now. Have you asked your city governor? 6-star veins. Xian's eyelids twitched, and he gazed at the Defiant with a strange expression. The Defiant was shocked when he saw the expression on Xian's face. Damn it. Brother, you wouldn't have taken a fancy to those 6-star veins, right? Xianxia fell silent. 6-star veins. That's a huge sum of money. Obviously, Daybreak City was determined to eliminate the Defiant. Once the Defiant was killed, then Eternal Night City wouldn't have the ability to go against Daybreak City. A monstrous genius like the Defiant didn't just affect the current situation, it represented the future as well. Right at this moment, the space in front of Xianxia trembled slightly, and then a figure floated out. The person who came was the City Lord of Daylight City, Musu. Musu looked at Xianxia. This is the best time for us to destroy the Eternal Night City. Xianxia shook his head slightly. Master, do you not believe me? Musu sighed softly. It's not that Master doesn't trust you, but if we carry on fighting like this, more of us will die. And now there's one more person in Evernight City. At this point he glanced at Xian. Xian joining the Evernight City put Daybreak City in a more passive position. The city of Evernight was not in a hurry at all. As long as it developed steadily, once Xian and the Defying Ones grew stronger, the city of Daybreak would be destroyed with a flick of a finger. Therefore he had no choice but to act now. He had to destroy the entire Evernight City before Xian and the Defying Ones fully matured. Musu looked at Xianxia again. I know you are proud and do not wish to kill the Defying Ones in such a way. But now this matter concerns the future of Daybreak City. I hope you can consider the bigger picture and join hands with the God Yong mercenary group to eliminate the Defying Ones in Xian. God Yong mercenary group. Hearing this, Xian could not help but look at the white-clothed man and the others in the distance, feeling somewhat surprised. These people were actually mercenaries. Where did these mercenaries come from? Their strength was so great. In the distance, Xianxia was silent. Beside Xian, the Defying Ones said in a low voice, Brother Yi, what should we do now? Xian suddenly looked at the white-clothed man and smiled. So it's the God Yong mercenary group. How interesting, huh? The white-clothed man frowned slightly. You know us. Xian smiled. Do you know who I am? The white-clothed man looked at Xian. I'm a little curious. Xian smiled. I'm from the number 1 mercenary group. The white-clothed man's eyes narrowed slightly. Jiang Pan. Xian laughed. Are you trying to trick me? When did Jiang Pan become the number 1 mercenary group? The white-clothed man glanced at Xian and fell silent. Jiang Pan was actually the number 2 mercenary group. The reason he said that was to test the authenticity of Xian. But Xian actually knew that Jiang Pan wasn't the number 1 mercenary group. Could he really be from that mercenary group? Thinking of this, the white-clothed man frowned slightly. Seeing the white-clothed man's expression, Xian relaxed inwardly. Damn it, you still want to trick me. I've tricked more people than you've eaten, so how could I fall for your trick? At this moment, Musu suddenly said, He's not from your place. The white-clothed man looked at Musu and Musu stared at Xian. He's from the Great Emotion Domain, he's not from your place. Xian smiled. Ridiculous. Musu stared at Xian and said, Don't try to fool around. We know exactly where you come from. Xian laughed out loud. How ridiculous. You guys know my background very well? Then can you talk about my bloodline power? Musu's expression turned ugly. He really didn't know. Yi Xian lit up the azure profound sword. Then do you know this sword? Musu's expression turned even uglier. Yi Xian looked at the white-clothed man in the distance. The latter suddenly shook his head. City Lord Musu is right, you're not from our place. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't speak. The white-clothed man continued. You just want to use the number 1 mercenary group to scare me. But do you know that I know the leader of the number 1 mercenary group? Yi Xian smiled. Let's not talk about this, let's talk about something else. Originally your goal was only to kill a defying one, but now I'm added to the list. Don't you think Daybreak City should increase the price? The white-clothed man frowned slightly when he heard this and he looked at Musu. We do indeed have to increase the price. Musu's expression instantly became extremely unsightly when he heard the white-clothed man. Increase the price. In order to hire the God Young mercenary group, Daybreak City had given them 6-star veins. 6-star veins wasn't a small amount. Because Daybreak City only had over a dozen star veins now, and it was equivalent to giving them half of it. Another 6 to kill Yi Xian? Musu's expression was unsightly to the extreme. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, before your God Young mercenary group kills someone, you will investigate the strength of your target, right? White Shirt looked at him. What are you trying to say? Yi Xian said seriously, firstly, the strength of the defying ones is definitely beyond your expectations, right? The white-robed man was silent. A little. Yi Xian continued. Second, I wasn't your target, but now I'm involved. Besides, I'm honest. Li also surprised you, didn't he? The white-robed man looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian continued. If their strength and numbers exceed expectations, they will be given 6-star veins. As he said this, he looked at Musu with undisguised disdain. I really look down on your White Day City. You actually used 6-star veins to make him fight against 2 peerless geniuses. Don't you feel embarrassed? You should at least give me 20 of them. Musu angrily said, Yi Xian, don't try to sow discord and play such low-level tricks. Yi Xian shrugged, then looked at the white-robed man. The defying ones and I can't defeat you. You have more people, but if the 2 of us fight with our lives on the line, can you guarantee that you can escape unscathed? The white-robed man was silent. Yi Xian continued, once your God Young mercenary group loses someone at that time, your ranking will definitely change, right? The white-robed man looked at Yi Xian. Your mouth is sharper than your sword. As he said this, he opened his palm and a spatial ring slowly floated in front of Musu. This is the deposit City Lord Musu gave us. Now return it to City Lord Musu. We won't accept this job. Or City Lord Musu can increase the price. If you can increase it to 20-star veins, we are willing to accept this job and kill these 2 people. City Lord Musu's expression was somewhat unsightly. White Robe, aren't you afraid of losing your reputation by raising the price like this? White Robe shook her head. It's not that we are raising the price, but City Lord Musu, the information you gave us was wrong. Let's not talk about the strength of the defying ones in the information you gave us. There is no swordsman. But now this swordsman has appeared, Musu said in a deep voice. I only want you to kill the defying ones, not the swordsman. This swordsman will act, and this is something you have to deal with yourself, right? White Robe looked at Musu. We had an agreement before. You will block the other experts of Eternal Night City, and this swordsman is also from Eternal Night City. If you can block him, we will kill this defying ones. But you did not block him. Musu said angrily. Our agreement was that my Daybreak City will stop the Eternal Night City's free transformation realm experts. And this swordsman is not free transformation realm. Yi Xian, who was at the side, suddenly said, but I have the strength of a free transformation realm expert. City Lord Musu, you are also an ambitious person, but you actually play this kind of word game. You are a bit too much. Too much? Musu looked at Yi Xian and said angrily, can you shut up? Yi Xian blinked. No. Musu stared at Yi Xian. His gaze was like a sword. At this time White Robe suddenly said, City Lord Musu, although this person is not free transformation realm, he has the strength of free transformation realm. Now there are only 2 ways. 1, you increase the price. 2, cancel the order you choose. Musu was silent. Increase the price? 20-star veins. Thinking of this, Musu's expression suddenly became extremely ugly. And at this time Yi Xian suddenly looked at White Robe. Do you accept the order now? White Robe looked at Yi Xian, not saying a word. Yi Xian smiled and said, "How about this? You help us kill this city Lord Musu, we will give you 6-star veins and we will help you block all the free transformation realm experts in Daybreak City. Not only that, my Eternal Night City can also help you. As long as you kill him, the 6-star veins will be yours. Do you accept?" Hearing this, Musu's expression instantly changed. P.S. Asking for votes. I exploded the day before yesterday. Chapter 2060. It had to be said that Musu was a little flustered at this moment. Once Bai Yi and the others accepted the order, Daybreak City would be in danger. Because once the white-robed man and the others accepted the order, Evernight City would definitely launch an all-out attack on Daybreak City. At that time, how could Daybreak City defend against these people? At this moment, Bai Yi shook her head. "We refuse." Yi Xian frowned. "Why?" Bai Yi looked at Yi Xian. "We will not accept orders targeting the previous employer." With that, he turned around and left. He didn't want to take any orders from his previous employer. Giving up on a deal wasn't something to be ashamed of, and it didn't break their principles. However, if they were to take on another job right after giving up, Xin Yong's reputation would be tarnished. Who would dare look for trouble with Xin Yong in the future? Musu instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Bai Yi and the others leave, and then he seemed to have thought of something. He glanced at Yi Xian before he looked at Bai Yi. "I agree to the conditions you spoke of earlier. My Daybreak City is willing to offer 20-star veins to kill these two." Hearing this, Bai Yi stopped. On the other hand, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. Damn it. Has Musu gone mad? In the distance, Bai Yi turned to look at Musu and the latter spoke in a low voice. "Bai Yi, my Daysun City is willing to offer 20-star veins." Bai Yi shook her head. "It's too late. We Xin Yong give up on this order." Musu was stunned and then he asked in a low voice, "Why?" Bai Yi glanced at Musu and did not answer the question. He turned around and led the people of the God Yong mercenary group to disappear into the depths of the starry sky. Seeing this, Musu's face turned extremely ugly. The defying one suddenly said, "Where did these fellows come from?" Yi Xian said with a smile, "Go back and ask the Lord of Cold River City." As he spoke, he glanced at Musu. "If you want to fight, then fight. You actually called for help. Despicable and shameless." Musu stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian looked at Tianchen and pressed his left thumb against the hilt of his sword. After a moment of silence, he chose not to attack. Yi Xian and the defying ones turned and left. In the distance, Tianchen also turned around and left after a moment of silence. Yi Xian and the defying ones returned to Eternal Night City. Within the Great Hall, Han Zhang's complexion was incomparably gloomy. I never imagined that Daybreak City would actually seek out people from that place. Yi Xian was a little curious. Where did the God Yong mercenary group come from? Han Jiang said in a deep voice, 6 realms. Yi Xian frowned. 6 realms. Han Jiang nodded slightly. His expression was somewhat solemn. It's an extremely terrifying place. It's very far away from us. If our people want to reach there, only the experts of the free transformation realm can do it, because they have to pass through countless space-time storms. Even an embodiment transformation realm expert would be in danger. I have experienced those space-time storms before and they are indeed terrifying. If one is not careful, one's soul would be destroyed. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "What kind of existences are those people in white and the others over there? Don't tell me it's a younger brother?" Han Jiang shook his head. "Impossible. They are definitely top-notch geniuses and experts over there. There are definitely more embodiment transformation realm experts over there than here, but it's not to the extent that they are everywhere. However, the quality of the experts over there is much higher than here." Yi Xian thought about it and then said, "I suggest that we start a war with Daybreak City directly." Start a war. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Han Jiang and the defying ones were both stunned. Han Jiang said in a deep voice, "Start a war directly?" Yi Xian nodded. Daybreak City has already staked everything on this one throw. They definitely won't give up. In other words, they definitely have a backup plan. Since that's the case, why don't we start a war directly and disrupt their rhythm? Han Jiang was silent. Start a full-scale war. That was very risky. Although they had the advantage, if they started a war directly, the outcome would still be difficult to predict. Because no one knew the true trump cards of both sides. Yi Xian continued, "They have already started a war, which means they won't stop. Especially now, after I join Eternal Night City, they will be even more impatient. Because the longer it takes, the more advantageous it will be for us. As he spoke, he looked at Han Jiang. If you were the Daybreak City Lord, what would you do? Han Jiang was silent for a moment and then he said, since the gap between the two sides isn't big, we might as well go all out. Yi Xian nodded. Before we left, that Musu was actually willing to use 20 star veins to kill me and the Defying Ones. What does this mean? It means that he is thinking the same as you and wants to fight to the death. Even if we don't start a war, they will still start a war. Han Jiang was silent for a moment and then he turned around. Ask all the elders to come to the hall immediately. Not far away, a black shadow left quietly. Soon, all the experts of Eternal Night City arrived at the hall. As for Yi Xian, he left the hall. How to fight was something that Han Jiang and the others should worry about. At this time, the Defying Ones walked to Yi Xian's side and he looked at Yi Xian. Thank you. Yi Xian smiled. Thank me for what? The Defying Ones whispered. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to come back. Yi Xian blinked his eyes. Do you still have star veins? The Defying One's expression froze. Yi Xian laughed. Just kidding. As he spoke, he took out a storage ring and placed it in front of the Defying Ones. This was the star vein that the Defying Ones had given him before. The Defying Ones looked at Yi Xian with a puzzled look. This? Yi Xian smiled and said, I don't cheat my friends. With that he turned around and left. In the same place, the Defying Ones looked at the storage ring in his hand, and did not speak for a long time. Yi Xian returned to his own hall. He entered Xiaota and then he sat cross-legged on the ground and slowly closed his eyes. In the previous battle with He Yan, Bai Yi and the others he had gained a lot, especially that state of meditation. When he entered this state he found that his sword had become completely different. This was something that wasn't there before. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the Cyan Profound Sword appeared in his hand. After looking at the Cyan Profound Sword for a moment he closed his eyes again. Meditation. At this moment he once again entered that wonderful state. When his heart calmed down he found that everything in the world had become clear. With a calm heart, everything was clear. Yi Xian quietly felt everything around him. At this moment he suddenly found that when he looked at the world with his heart, everything had become a little different. At this moment he felt that the world was more real. He could clearly feel everything around him, such as the water, the mountains, the surrounding air, everything around him, everything. People's lives were basically busy for food and clothing. How many people could calm down and feel the universe? In fact, the scenery on the road of life was very beautiful, but few people could stop to appreciate it. Of course, compared to the scenery, food and clothing were more important. In the case of not having enough to eat, everything was nonsense. At this moment, the Cyan Profound Sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly trembled. Clearly it was resonating with him. Yi Xian suddenly stood up and looked into the distance. His thumb gently pressed against the hilt of the Cyan Profound Sword. At this moment Xiaota suddenly said, Young master, don't do anything rash. Yi Xian smiled. All right. As he spoke he left Xiaota and arrived in an unknown galaxy. Yi Xian looked around him and then gently pushed with his thumb. Flash. The Cyan Profound Sword pierced through the sky. In an instant the galaxy that he could see was directly annihilated. Yi Xian smiled and opened his palm. The Cyan Profound Sword appeared in his hand. In reality he really wanted to try using his full strength. Whether it was the battle against Bai Yi and the others or this moment he had not used his full strength. This was because he had not chosen to use the power of the heavenly realm and the heavenly realm. With the support of these two forces, that sword of his could be considered his strongest move. He did not try it now because if he did it would cause too much of a commotion. Moreover, the power would be too great and the repercussions would be too great. He was still quite close to Eternal Night City. At this moment Heaven's Hater suddenly appeared by Yi Xian's side. Yi Xian looked at Heaven's Hater and smiled. It's you. Heaven's Hater nodded. The war is about to begin. Yi Xian nodded. Eternal Night City and Daybreak City are about to make a decision. Heaven's Hater looked at Yi Xian. You're on Eternal Night City's side? Yi Xian nodded. Heaven's Hater nodded. I understand. Yi Xian smiled. This is a crisis, but it is also an opportunity. Heaven's Hater glanced at Yi Xian. I understand. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, the Defying One appeared. He looked at Yi Xian and said, We have to go. Xian smiled. Are you ready for the war? The Defying One nodded. Xian asked, is there any movement from Daybreak City? The Defying One shook his head. Nothing. Xian frowned. Something's wrong. The Defying One was stunned. What's wrong? Xian said, let's go. With that he disappeared with the Defying One and Heaven's Hater. When they returned to Eternal Night City, Han Jiang had already gathered all the top experts in Eternal Night City. Obviously they were going to fight to the death with Daybreak City. Seeing Xian, Han Jiang smiled. We're ready to fight. Xian said, just now the Defying One said there was no movement from Daybreak City. Is that right? Han Jiang nodded. I also feel that something's wrong. Logically speaking, they should know that we're going to attack them. But they didn't do anything. It's abnormal. Xian was silent for a moment. They must have a backup plan. Han Jiang nodded. They must have a backup plan. I just don't know what it is. Xian looked at Han Jiang. Do we have a backup plan? Han Jiang smiled. Of course. A force that has been passed down for so many years must have some trump cards. Moreover, we have you this time. Our chances of winning are high. However, we can't be careless. Daybreak City has been passed down for so many years. They must have a trump card that we don't know about. Anyway, let's fight first. Xian nodded slightly. Just as he was about to speak, an old man suddenly appeared in front of everyone. The old man said in a low voice, City Lord, all the powerhouses of Daybreak City are charging towards Evernight City. They attacked first? Everyone in the surroundings frowned when they heard this. Chapter 2061. Something was not right. Han Jiang and the others frowned tightly. The other party actually took the initiative to charge at them. Han Jiang looked at Xian. After a moment of silence, Xian said, there must be reinforcements. At this point he looked at Han Jiang. How many star veins do we have now? Han Jiang hesitated for a moment before he said, 13. After a moment of silence, Xian shook his head. It's too late. It's too late to find reinforcements now. Han Jiang's expression turned ugly. That Wuxia must have used all the star veins in Daybreak City to seek outside help. Xian said softly, if we succeed in destroying the city of Evernight, the dozen or so star veins will be worth it, won't it? Han Jiang looked at Xian. Little friend Yi, in your opinion, what should we do now? Xian smiled and said, what else can I do? Of course it's a fight. Han Jiang was stunned for a moment and then he laughed, then let's fight. Fight. The sound was like thunder shaking the heavens. In the city, countless warriors of the city of Evernight roared together. At this time, several powerful auras came crashing down from the sky above Evernight City. Wuxia and the others had arrived. On the city wall, Han Jiang looked at Wuxia, who was in the lead, and said with a smile, City Lord Wuxia, I didn't expect you guys to come first. Wuxia said indifferently, we'll have to fight sooner or later. Why don't we put an end to it today? Han Jiang nodded. You're right. Wuxia raised his right hand and pressed it forward. Kill. Kill. As soon as he finished speaking, the group of Daybreak City experts behind him rushed towards Evernight City. The battlefield was the city of Evernight. Han Jiang's eyes flashed with viciousness. Kill. As the sound of his voice faded, countless experts from the Evernight City soared into the sky, heading straight for Wuxia and the others. In the city, Xian looked at the Defying Ones, while the Defying Ones looked at the distant horizon. Their Tianqian was looking at him. After a moment of silence, the Defying One said, Brother Yi, it's up to you now. As soon as he finished speaking, he shot into the sky and headed straight for sky dust. On the city wall, Xian looked at Wuxia, who was in the distance, and the latter was looking at him as well. Xian smiled, then turned around and disappeared into the horizon. Gone. Seeing this, Wuxia frowned slightly. After a moment of silence, Wuxia looked at Han Jiang and said, Han Jiang, although you and I have fought over the years, there has never been a clear winner. Why don't we decide the winner today? Han Jiang smiled and said, as you wish. With that, the two of them disappeared on the spot. On the other side, Xian immediately concealed himself. His intuition told him that something was wrong. Daybreak City must have found reinforcements, and he had hidden himself to find that reinforcements. In the dark, Xian looked around but found nothing. Right at this moment, Xian's pupils suddenly shrank. He suddenly turned around, and as he did, A fist mark flashed towards him. Yi Xian raised his thumb lightly and the green profound sword flew out. Bang! A wave of sword light suddenly erupted in front of Yi Xian. In an instant an afterimage was sent flying thousands of feet away. When the afterimage came to a stop, it was a young man. The man was wearing a tight black robe and a pair of black and gold arm guards on his arms. Yi Xian looked at the young man and said in a low voice, "Xiao Ta, why didn't you warn me that someone was approaching?" Xiao Ta said in a low voice, "You didn't ask me." Yi Xian's face froze. Right at this moment the black-robed man sized Yi Xian up and then he sneered, "You're that swordsman." Yi Xian frowned slightly, "You know me?" The black-robed man looked at Yi Xian. "I heard Bai Yi and the others didn't join forces to kill you." Yi Xian was about to speak when a wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of the black-robed man's mouth. "Bai Yi and the others are too weak. They can't even deal with trash like you. To think they're ranked third in the mercenary group." Right at this moment Yi Xian raised his thumb lightly. The green profound sword was suddenly unsheathed, and a blood-red sword light tore through the battlefield at an extremely swift speed. In the blink of an eye, it had arrived before the black-robed man. The black-robed man's eyes narrowed slightly and he raised his right arm to block. Bang! Along with an explosion, the bracer on the black-robed man's right arm exploded into pieces, and he was instantly pushed back thousands of meters. When he stopped, his right arm was directly shattered. Yi Xian glanced at the black-robed man who was slightly stunned and he frowned slightly. "So weak? Why are you so weak? Can you be a little stronger? You're so weak that I don't even have the mood to draw my sword." In his body, Xiao Ta sighed softly. "This man is too much. He actually dares to verbally attack Little Master. Damn it, if it's in terms of verbal attacks, I'm afraid even 3 strikes wouldn't be a match for Little Master. No one can defeat a shameless person with verbal attacks." When he heard Yi Xian's words, the black-robed man's face instantly turned livid with rage, and he glared fixedly at Yi Xian. "How dare you humiliate me?" A wisp of disdain arose on the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. "Humiliate you? Do you think you're worthy? Why don't you take a piss and look at yourself? Are you worth it for me to humiliate you?" The black-robed man's eyes were scarlet red. "Yi Xian." Yi Xian laughed coldly. "Are you a dog? Do you only know how to bark? Come, I beg you to kill me." The black-robed man suddenly roared furiously. In the next moment his figure leaped up and charged towards Yi Xian. As he charged, a strand of formidable force swept towards Yi Xian like a torrent, and in an instant the entire starry sky seethed. Yi Xian lightly flicked his thumb. A sword howl resounded and then a sword flashed through the surroundings. Bang! A deafening explosion resounded in the distance, and then the black-robed man was instantly pushed over 30 kilometers back. This time only his soul remained when he stopped moving. At this moment the black-robed man was stunned. Yi Xian suddenly spoke with pain. "Hi God! Why are you so weak? Why are you so weak?" The black-robed man was speechless. Yi Xian suddenly shook his head and sighed and then he turned around and left. The black-robed man was slightly stunned. Why isn't he attacking? Suddenly Yi Xian stopped moving. You're too weak. Too weak. Such a weak person like you isn't worthy of dying by my sword. If I were you, I'd choose to buy a piece of tofu and kill myself. I'm not afraid of living if I'm so weak." As soon as he finished speaking, he started walking towards the distance. The black-robed man behind him suddenly roared furiously like a wild beast. "Damnable swordsman! How dare you humiliate me? You!" Yi Xian suddenly stopped moving and then he turned around to look at the black-robed man. "Come over and hit me. I beg you to come over and kill me. I really want to die." The black-robed man gazed at Yi Xian as if he was looking at a devil, and even his soul was trembling. "You..." Yi Xian shook his head slightly. "I won't speak to you from now onward. You're so weak that you don't have the right to speak to me. I don't speak to trash. Thank you." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Xiao Ta was speechless. The black-robed man was on the verge of going mad. "You can't humiliate me like that. Who can endure it? Anyone with a little bit of courage wouldn't be able to endure it." The black-robed man directly charged towards Yi Xian. All he wanted to do now was to kill Yi Xian, or even perish together with Yi Xian. At this moment, a woman suddenly appeared in front of the black-robed man. She flicked her sleeves and the black-robed man was directly blocked by a mysterious force. The woman wore a simple cotton dress and her long hair draped behind her. She had a beautiful face and her body exuded a faint fragrance. On her waist hung a small white pouch with a small Ning character on it. The black-robed man glared at the woman angrily. "Ning Ning, don't you dare stop me." The woman named Ning Ning suddenly waved her right hand lightly. Smack. The black-robed man was directly sent flying by this slap. When he stopped, his soul was completely illusory and almost transparent. At this moment the black-robed man sobered up. Of course he also panicked. Just now he had lost his rationality and forgotten about life and death. Now that his mind was clear, he began to fear death again. Ning Ning glanced coldly at the black-robed man, then turned to look at Yi Xian who had stopped in his tracks. "Swordsman." Yi Xian sized up Ning Ning then smiled. "Are you the #1 mercenary corps or Riverside?" Ning Ning looked at Yi Xian. "Riverside." Yi Xian nodded slightly. "Let's cut the crap. It's obvious that you've been dragged here by Daybreak City to kill me. Since you're here to kill me, do you choose to fight one-on-one, or do we choose to fight as a group? If it's one-on-one, we'll fight one-on-one. If it's a group, then I'll call for reinforcements." Ning Ning stared at Yi Xian, not saying a word. Yi Xian frowned. "Why? Is it hard to choose?" Ning Ning suddenly said, "Who are you?" Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he burst out laughing. Ning Ning frowned slightly. "What are you laughing at?" Yi Xian looked at Ning Ning and a trace of ridicule appeared on the corner of his mouth. "You don't even know who I am, yet you dare to come and kill me. Is your Riverside mercenary corps full of idiots?" Ning Ning's eyes narrowed and she flicked her sleeve. In an instant the spacetime in front of her rippled, and a powerful force passed through countless spacetime and slashed towards Yi Xian. An extremely terrifying force. In the distance Yi Xian lightly pushed with his thumb. The green profound sword flew out. With this sword the spacetime in front of Yi Xian was directly torn apart, and what was torn apart was Ning Ning's strength. Ning Ning frowned slightly when she saw this scene. Yi Xian looked at Ning Ning and said with ridicule, "Do you know why White Robe abandoned him?" Ning Ning looked at Yi Xian. "I'm really curious." Yi Xian opened his palm, and the green profound sword suddenly flew before Ning Ning. "Woman, take a good look at this sword for me, and then think about whether your lowly Six Realms world has a divine weapon of this level." "Lowly Six Realms world?" Ning Ning frowned slightly and she glanced coldly at Yi Xian, and then looked at the green profound sword in front of Yi Xian. She hesitated for a moment, and then she grasped the green profound sword. The moment she grasped the green profound sword, her expression changed drastically, and she subconsciously let go of it. At this moment her eyes were filled with horror. She sensed an extremely terrifying unknown existence in the sword sect. Ning Ning looked up at Yi Xian. "Who the hell are you?" Yi Xian said with ridicule. "Who am I?" Xiao Ta suddenly said, "You're the strongest second generation. The only one." Yi Xian. P.S. Asking for votes. I exploded 3 days ago. I have the confidence to ask for votes. Chapter 2062. The strongest second generation. Hearing Xiao Ta's words, Yi Xian's face darkened. At this time Nan Ning asked again, "Who are you?" Yi Xian looked at Nan Ning and smiled. Guess. Guess. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the girl named Nan Ning frowned. Damn it, how could she guess? In the distance Yi Xian didn't make a move. He didn't because he felt several strange auras. These auras were extremely powerful, 2 of them even stronger than the Free Will realm. Obviously there were people from the Riverside mercenary group in the dark. He wasn't afraid of one-on-one, but a group fight wouldn't be so fun. Moreover, he always believed that the problem couldn't be solved with fists. In this world there must be love. In the distance Nan Ning was silent. At this moment she was in a dilemma. She was confident that she could kill the lone Yi Xian. However, she was a little worried because the man in front of her wasn't an ordinary person. Especially that sword. Just now when she touched that sword, a trace of fear arose from the depths of her heart. If she killed the man in front of her, there would be great karma. But if she didn't kill him, those 20 star veins, that was enough to raise the strength of the Riverside mercenary group to another level. Moreover, the Riverside mercenary group had never given up. He didn't want to. At this moment, a young man suddenly appeared beside Nan Ning. The man looked at the distant Yi Xian. "You have to make a decision." After a moment of silence, Nan Ning looked at Yi Xian. "If you are willing to join the Riverside mercenary group, Not only can we turn enemies into friends, but the Riverside Mercenary Group can also help you destroy the Daylily City. Hearing this, the young man looked at Nan Ning, stunned. Nan Ning kept staring at Yi Xian, her expression calm. In the distance, Yi Xian shook his head. I refuse. Nan Ning narrowed her eyes. Are you sure? Yi Xian smiled. Yes, because I will not accept threats. If you want to fight, I will accompany you at any time. He didn't panic. As long as the Riverside Mercenary Group didn't participate in the battle, Evernight City wouldn't lose to Daybreak City. The one who should be anxious was Daybreak City. Meanwhile, Nan Ning suddenly said, Let's go. With that, she turned around and left. The young man by her side was slightly stunned and puzzled, but he didn't ask any questions. He turned around and left. In the surroundings, the auras hidden in the dark also disappeared. In the distance, Yi Xian glanced at Ning and the others who were leaving, then turned and left. On the other side, the young man walked to Ning's side. Nan Ning said in a light voice, if he agreed to join our Riverside, then I would surely kill him. However, he didn't agree. The young man was puzzled. But Nan Ning's expression was calm. If he chooses to join us, it proves that he's afraid of us. If he's afraid of us, it means that the power behind him is ordinary. But what does it mean that he chose to refuse to join us under those circumstances? It means that he doesn't fear us at all. When she spoke up to hear, she raised her head to look at the distant secrets of the heavens and said softly, No wonder Bai Yi gave up. The young man sighed, What a pity about those 20-star veins. Nanning nodded. It's indeed a pity. Her heart ached at the thought of those 20-star veins. The young man suddenly said, Are we going back? Nanning shook her head. No. As she spoke, she turned around and said, We can't come here for nothing. Yi Xian returned to Eternal Night City. At this moment, the sky above Eternal Night City had become a battlefield. Both sides fought fiercely. However, Eternal Night City had the upper hand. After all, this was Eternal Night City. At this moment, the distant Daybreak City Lord Mu Su suddenly stopped. He looked at Yi Xian, his eyes filled with disbelief. How are you still alive? Yi Xian looked at Mu Su and said with a smile, I killed all your mercenaries. Bullshit. Mu Su suddenly roared, How could you kill them? They are the second strongest mercenary group in the 6 realms. With your strength, it's impossible to kill them. Yi Xian said with a smile, How do you know that I have no men? Mu Su stared at Yi Xian. Who are you? Yi Xian suddenly looked at Han Jiang. Han Jiang City Lord, stall him. Han Jiang nodded. Okay. As his voice fell, he directly rushed towards Mu Su. Almost at the same time, Yi Xian gently raised his thumb, and the profound green sword suddenly flew out from his scabbard. In the distance, the head of a Daoming realm expert from Daybreak City flew out. Blood gushed out like a fountain. It was extremely bloody. Mu Su's eyes almost split apart from rage when he saw this scene. Yi Xian ignored him and directly disappeared. The next moment, another Daoming realm expert from Daybreak City died. With Yi Xian's participation in the battle instantly became one-sided. Because Yi Xian had no opponent. Under the power of embodiment transformation, no one could take a single strike from Yi Xian. In a short period of time, Eternal Night City had completely suppressed the Daybreak City experts in the distance. In the sky, Mu Su's expression was extremely ugly. However, at this moment he had no ability to change anything. He could only watch as countless Daybreak City experts were killed. However, the experts of Daybreak City were unyielding, and not a single one of them chose to flee. All of them were fighting to the death. However, Eternal Night City didn't show any mercy as well. Yi Xian didn't show any mercy as well. It was extremely foolish to show mercy to one's enemies. Because if Daybreak City was given a chance, then they wouldn't hesitate to annihilate him. Shrill cries resounded incessantly as more and more experts of Daybreak City perished. Suddenly, some experts of Daybreak City had actually chosen to detonate themselves with the intention of taking the experts of Eternal Night City down with them. However, the experts of Eternal Night City didn't retreat at all when facing these experts of Daybreak City who were unafraid of death. The experts of Daybreak City gradually grew fewer and fewer. It didn't take long for the battle to end. At this moment, the ground outside Eternal Night City was covered in the corpses of the experts of Daybreak City. Their blood had dyed the ground bright red, and the air was suffused with the nauseating smell of blood. Only 2 people remained alive, and it was the city governor of Daybreak City and Tianqin. Mu Su had been surrounded by the experts of Eternal Night City. Mu Su stared blankly at the scene below him and he seemed as if he'd lost his soul. We've lost. Daybreak City, who'd staked everything on a single throw, had lost in the end. As if he'd thought of something, Mu Su suddenly turned around and gazed into the distance. Zhangpan. The space in the distance trembled slightly and then a woman walked out. It was Nan Ning. Mu Su suddenly roared like a wild beast when he saw Nan Ning. Zhangpan. Where's your professionalism? What happened to killing Zhou Xian and annihilating Eternal Night City? Actually, he didn't hate Zhou Xian because he and Zhou Xian were enemies to begin with, and it was only natural for them to kill each other. What he truly hated was Zhangpan. It was Zhangpan who went back on his word that caused Daybreak City to suffer such a crushing defeat. Nan Ning gazed silently at Mu Su. Mu Su stared fixedly at Nan Ning. Why? Why? Nan Ning shook her head slightly. The information you gave us was wrong. He isn't just a monster. There's someone behind him. Although 20 star veins is a lot, his life is far more than 20 star veins. Hearing this, Mu Su was stunned. The next moment he turned to look at Zhou Xian in the distance. Who the hell are you? Han Jiang and the others also looked at Zhou Xian. They had to admit that they were also quite curious about Zhou Xian's background. Who the hell was this guy? Nan Ning also looked at Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian smiled faintly. Everyone, don't be curious about my identity. I'm just an ordinary person who was abandoned by my father. Oh no, I mean an ordinary person who was left to fend for himself. Mu Su suddenly asked, Who is your father? Zhou Xian smiled. City Lord Mu Su, I think we shouldn't discuss this anymore. Mu Su took a deep look and in the next moment he disappeared from the spot. He didn't escape. He didn't attack Zhou Xian either. Instead he attacked Nan Ning. Obviously he really hated Nan Ning and the others. If Nan Ning and the others hadn't suddenly betrayed him, then Daybreak City wouldn't have suffered such an outcome. Han Jiang was slightly stunned when he saw Mu Su attack Nan Ning. He naturally didn't stop Mu Su because he wished for nothing more than for Mu Su to fight Nan Ning and the others to the death. Nan Ning gazed at Mu Su with a calm expression. Right when Mu Su arrived 300 m away from Nan Ning, the space there suddenly split apart, and then an afterimage flashed by. Mu Su's pupils constricted. He didn't stop and he swiftly punched with his right fist. At the instant he punched forward, the space in an area of a few hundreds of thousands of kilometers trembled violently. At this moment the afterimage suddenly became illusory and in the next moment, a fist suddenly blasted towards Mu Su. Rumble. The fist suddenly shattered into pieces, and the afterimage instantly retreated by over 10 kilometers. Meanwhile, a ray of cold light suddenly appeared behind Mu Su. Mu Su's pupils constricted, and then he swiftly turned around and raised his arms to block it. Bang! The ray of cold light shattered into pieces, and then Mu Su instantly retreated by over 1 kilometer. As soon as he stopped moving, a fine silver thread suddenly flew out from the expanse of space behind him. Mu Su turned around once more, pressed his palms together and then pressed them forward. Rumble. The space in front of him instantly caved down. The fine silver thread shattered into nothingness. At the same time, a powerful force swept towards Nan Ning. At this moment, Nan Ning suddenly took a step forward, and with this step he arrived directly above Mu Su's head. In the next moment he pressed his fingers together and lightly pointed downwards. A wisp of a ferocious expression flashed through Mu Su's eyes. Die. As soon as he finished speaking he moved forward instead of retreating and punched upwards. He went head-on against her. Bang. Meanwhile the world they resided in was suddenly obliterated. In the next moment, Mu Su's pupils constricted because his entire right arm had been blasted into nothingness. After that Nan Ning's right hand pressed down onto his head, and then she clawed lightly in an instant. Everyone watched as Mu Su's head was clawed up into the air, and blood sprayed out like a fountain. The surroundings were silent to the point a falling needle could be heard. Chapter 2063. Kill him. Everyone in the surroundings was looking at Nanning. Needless to say, Zhou Xian was quite shocked because Mu Su's strength was extremely terrifying. Before Nan Ning attacked, 3 top-rate experts had attacked Mu Su, but they hadn't been able to kill Mu Su. Obviously, the experts at the embodiment transformation realm weren't weak. However, Nan Ning's strength surprised him. Nan Ning's strength had slightly exceeded his expectations. Han Jiang and the others gazed at Nan Ning with a trace of fear in their eyes. The strength of this riverside mercenary group from the 6 dimensions isn't just ordinary. Nan Ning suddenly gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian grinned. Miss Nan Ning, well done. All the others were speechless. Nan Ning gazed at Yi Xian in silence. Meanwhile, Han Jiang suddenly sent a voice transmission to Yi Xian. I just found out that they've gone to Daybreak City, and they've obtained the 6 star veins within Daybreak City. Yi Xian's face instantly darkened when he heard this. Nan Ning suddenly turned around and left. Meanwhile, a shadow flashed down from the sky and shot towards Nan Ning. It was Tianqin, the last monstrous genius of Daybreak City. Nan Ning didn't even turn around. Right when Tianqin was about to arrive in front of Nan Ning, a shadow suddenly appeared behind Nan Ning, and then a ray of cold light shot out like a waterfall and instantly obstructed Tianqin's path. Rumble. An explosion resounded and then Tianqin was blasted over 1 kilometer back. A black-clothed man was standing behind Nan Ning, and he held a dagger in his right hand. Tianqin stared fixedly at the black-clothed man and was about to attack again. Meanwhile, the Defiant spoke abruptly, Tianqin, they're outnumbered. You can't defeat them. Tianqin fell silent. Nan Ning turned around to glance at Tianqin with a calm gaze. However, she didn't attack and she just led the other experts along as she vanished into the distance. However, before completely disappearing, she threw Yi Xian, who was next to her. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. He rubbed his face lightly and said, Xiao Ta, that woman keeps looking at me. Could she have taken a liking to me? Xiao Ta. At the side, Han Jiang looked at the corpses around him. After a long silence, he suddenly looked at the experts of Evernight City outside the city and smiled. We won. Victory. All of a sudden, all the warriors in the city of Evernight seethed with excitement. Victory. The Evernight City and the Daybreak City had been fighting for countless years. Today the Evernight City had finally won. Yi Xian looked around, then turned around and left. Yi Xian found Heaven's Loathsome and God Eye. Both of them were still alive. He had been keeping an eye on them. Heaven's Hater looked at Yi Xian. You're leaving? Yi Xian nodded. Heaven's Loathsome asked again. 6 realms. Yi Xian smiled and said, yes. I want to take a look. Heaven's Loathsome was silent. God Eye wanted to say something but hesitated. Yi Xian continued, I will talk to the Lord of Cold River City. He will focus on training the 2 of you and help you reach the transformation realm as soon as possible. Although Nanning and the others had taken 6 star veins, the Daybreak City had more than that. Conservatively speaking, the Evernight City could get at least 15 star veins. God Eye suddenly smiled and said, Brother Yi, wait for us to come find you. Yi Xian smiled and said, all right. Heaven's Hater glanced at Yi Xian and said nothing. At this time Yi Xian suddenly looked at Heaven's Hater and said, don't call me King Reliance. This time I didn't rely on others. As he spoke, he turned around and flew on his sword. In the blink of an eye, he vanished into the horizon. Heaven's Hater looked at Yi Xian's vanishing figure and said nothing for a long time. At the end of the starry sky, Yi Xian suddenly stopped because the Defying One and Han Jiang had appeared before him. Han Jiang smiled and said, why did you leave without saying goodbye? Yi Xian smiled and said, Lord of Cold River City, the matter here has come to an end. Han Jiang hesitated for a moment, and then he took out a spatial ring and gave it to Yi Xian. Yi Xian was surprised. What are you doing? Han Jiang smiled and said, I know you won't stay here. There are 2 star veins in here. I hope you can use them. 2 star veins. Yi Xian did not refuse. He took the storage ring right away. Thank you so much. Han Jiang shook his head slightly. It's me who should thank you. If it weren't for you, my Evernight City would be finished. If Yi Xian hadn't persuaded the Riverside mercenary group to leave, my Evernight City would have lost. Yi Xian smiled and said, don't mention it. Strictly speaking, I'm from Evernight City as well. Hearing this, Han Jiang laughed and then he took out another spatial ring and gave it to Yi Xian. There was another star vein inside. Han Jiang said seriously, be careful when you're outside. If you meet someone you can't defeat, don't fight them head-on. Staying alive is more important. When you have time, come back more often. Before, he treated Yi Xian as a guest. Now he treated Yi Xian as one of his own. In fact, it wasn't that he wanted to treat Yi Xian as an outsider. Mainly, he felt that Yi Xian didn't treat himself as a member of Evernight City. Yi Xian, the Defying One suddenly asked, Brother Yi, are you going to the Six Realms? Yi Xian nodded and said, I'm going to have a look. Together? The Defying One shook his head slightly, I have to wait. Yi Xian smiled and said, then I'll wait for you over there. The Defying One nodded and said, okay. Yi Xian suddenly asked, where's Tianqin? Tianqin. Han Jiang said, he's gone. We didn't make things difficult for him. Yi Xian looked at Han Jiang. Han Jiang smiled and said, even if he wants to take revenge, he'll take revenge on the people by the riverside. Hearing this, Yi Xian understood. In fact, he could see that although Tianqin and the Defying One were opponents, the two of them definitely appreciated each other. Otherwise, Tianqin wouldn't have come out to stop the God Yong mercenary group. Han Jiang suddenly said, little friend Yi, take care. Yi Xian smiled and said, take care. After saying this, he disappeared at the end of the starry sky. Han Jiang looked at the end of the starry sky and said softly, I wonder where this little guy came from. As he said this, he looked at the Defying One. The Defying One shook his head and said, previously I thought he was from the Great Motian Domain's sacred bloodline, but now it seems that the Great Motian Domain is just a passerby to him. Han Jiang smiled faintly. I remember that he joined Daylight City in the beginning. Unfortunately, Daylight City actually chased him out. The Defying One suddenly said in a deep voice, Daybreak City seems to have another old guy. Han Jiang turned his head to take a look and sneered, that old fart runs faster than anyone else. The Defying One nodded slightly and said, I'm going into seclusion for a while. Han Jiang smiled and said, yes, you have to work hard. The Defying One looked at the end of the starry sky and then turned to leave. On the other side, on a mountain peak, there were 3 people standing there. An old man, a young man, and a woman. The man was Mu Chen, who had befriended Yi Xian that day, and the woman was his sister. The old man was Mu Chen's grandfather, Mu Ming, who was also the previous city lord of Daybreak City. Mu Ming looked into the distance and said softly, I never thought that my Daybreak City would be finished like this. Mu Chen and his sister fell silent. Mu Ming suddenly shook his head and said, if I had listened to your suggestion and personally intervened, things might not have turned out like this. I've underestimated Yi Xian. That day Mu Chen came to him hoping that he could intervene and mediate the conflict between Yi Xian and the Day-Night City. Unfortunately, he did not take it seriously at that time. He allowed the strong warriors of the Day-Night City to hunt down Yi Xian, which led to Yi Xian completely turning to the Evernight City. If he had listened to Mu Chen's suggestion and intervened, things might have turned out differently. Of course, there were no ifs in this world. At this time Mu Ming said, the 2 of you should leave. Mu Chen looked at Mu Ming and Mu Ming said softly, don't think about revenge. Daybreak City will not be able to take revenge. Mu Chen hesitated for a moment, then bowed slightly and left with his sister. In this place there was no place for them to stay. Yi Xian and Jiang Ban would not target them, but Eternal Night City would not let them go. Weeds must be cut by the roots. On the side, Mu Ming looked into the distant sky and said nothing. On the other side, Mu Chen walked down the mountain with his sister. The woman said in a low voice, brother, where are we going now? Mu Chen said, to the 6 worlds. The woman hesitated for a moment and said, Yi Xian will definitely go to the 6 worlds as well. Mu Chen smiled. He won't look for trouble with us. The woman was puzzled. Why? Mu Chen said softly, because we're no different than ants in his eyes. Would you purposely step on an ant to death? The woman was speechless. At the end of the starry sky, Yi Xian was flying on his sword. His target this time was the 6 worlds. His target was actually very clear, and that was to ceaselessly search for stronger experts and follow in the footsteps of his father and the others. Right at this moment, Xiao Ta suddenly said, young master, I suggest that you cultivate for a while first. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? Xiao Ta said, I'm afraid that once you go to the 6 worlds, you'll become a little brother again. Don't tell me you've forgotten those bloody lessons in the past? Yi Xian's expression froze. Needless to say, what Xiao Ta said did make some sense. The 6 worlds. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he was about to enter Xiao Ta's body to cultivate. Suddenly, the space in front of him trembled slightly and then it split open. After that, a man who was dressed like a beggar walked out from within it. Needless to say, this man was really wretched and he was disgusting at first glance. Yi Xian didn't like to judge a book by its cover, but some people were just like that. They were disgusting at first glance. The man gazed at Yi Xian and grinned. I've been paying attention to you for a long time. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. Who are you? The man roared with laughter. Who I am isn't important. What's important is that I want to meet someone. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Meet someone? The man pointed at the sword in Yi Xian's hand and then he said, I want to meet the person who made this sword. Meet Qing Er? Yi Xian was stunned when he heard this. The man closed his eyes slowly. I've cultivated in the divine battlefield for 102,000 years, and I've absorbed countless battle intent during this period. When he spoke up to this point, he gazed at Yi Xian with a slightly crazed expression. I'm already invincible in this world. Do you know the loneliness of being invincible? Yi Xian was speechless.